Hey, what's up guys, and welcome to the Game Asset Masterclass Volume 2. It's been a while since I made a video like this, and a lot of people really seem to like the last one, so this one's going to have a ton of information. I'm going to show you the modeling process, the unwrapping process, the optimization process, texturing, pretty much everything you need to know to take the default cube and turn it into this cool looking model here, this door. Okay, so we're going to show you the whole process. You're going to learn a ton, so just sit back, enjoy it, follow along if you'd like, and we'll hop right into it. Now, for anyone watching this who's not used to Blender or still a beginner or perhaps wants to learn more about Blender, we have a completely free hard surface modeling course available on our website. You can pick that up. There's a link in the top of the description. So that'll kind of get you up to speed with Blender if you're new to the software, or if you're just interested in taking the course. It's totally free, and I think you'll get a lot of value out of that. So link to that in the description for anyone new here. It'll get you up to speed pretty quickly, and we can go ahead and get started. Okay, let's discuss tools. So the tools I use in Blender in my hard surface modeling workflow are HardOps, Box Cutter, and Machine Tools. The HardOps and Box Cutter bundle is like 37 bucks, the best money you'll spend if you want to quickly model. You don't have to get them, but it's just going to save you a lot of time. These are the tools I use personally, and these are the tools I'm going to be using in this tutorial. So if you have a problem with me using the tools, this probably isn't the video for you. My main goal is to be as efficient as possible in my workflow, and these tools allow me to do that. Second, I use Machine Tools. It's totally free and just allows you to go in and out of edit and object mode very quickly. And the last add-on I use is also free. It's called Power Save, which basically will save a copy of your scene and just kind of save you in case of a crash. So with the tools out of the way, you can get them in the description, by the way. We can go ahead and get started. So I always love starting my blockouts just by pretty much figuring out the proportions that I want to use. So, I just kind of scale the cube, figure out more or less where I want it, and then kind of go from there, right? And that's going to give you like the best solution in most cases. So I'm just going to kind of scale this down, do all that good stuff. When you first get started with hard surface modeling, one of the most difficult things can be, even coming up with a shape in the first place. And what I can say based off of my experience is that simply comes down to how much, energy you're putting in each day. You need to practice consistently every single week, ideally every single day, because if you don't, then what's going to happen is you're just not going to advance at all. It's who would have thought, right? Like the painter who practices every day becomes a better painter, right? It's the same idea with 3D. So I see a lot of people, they're like, oh, I struggle. And then I ask, how much effort are you putting in each day? And they're like, well, maybe like an hour or two a week. And I'm like, it's not enough. You got to put in a lot more effort than that, because the issue with that is everyone else is doing the same thing as you, right? Everyone else is putting in the same exact amount of time and pretty much getting nowhere. But if you're the guy who puts in way more work than anyone else, by default, you're just going to get better than everyone else, right? It's not rocket science. Just most people don't want to put in the work, and that's really what you have to do. And I understand people are busy with other things, but if you really, really value and enjoy something, you'll find the time in one way or another, right? I tell people, for example, I was talking to my friend the other day, and I was like, I just don't have time to cook. And I thought about it to myself. I'm like, I do have time to cook. If I really found the time, I could do it. I just don't like cooking, right? I'd rather just get a meal prepping service, and the meals come out to about the same price anyways. And it's just an excuse, really. It's that I don't prioritize that type of time. So I kind of tell people that, and it makes them a bit uncomfortable, but it's the truth. You prioritize your time for things that are important to you. So if 3D is important to you, you really need to put aside the time each and every week to just, practice. There's no other way to do it. So yeah, that's usually what I do. And just the more you model, the more you follow tutorials, and the more you practice, the easier all this stuff becomes. So that's kind of my little motivational speech for the day, I guess. It's just put in the work, right? Same for anything. Let's see, it looks pretty good. So this could be like the outline for the door right here. I definitely want this to be a bit wider, so let me scale this a little bit on the Y, and take this and move it a bit on the Y as well, just so it's more or less big enough. It's a little bit too big. That should be enough. And then maybe I could just hop in here with the box cutter, Ngon cutter. For those of you that don't use Box Cutter, you'll begin to see why I love it so much as you watch this video, because it just speeds up your entire workflow. It does take, a little bit of time to learn. We have a complete course on HardOps and Box Cutter, actually, if you want to pick that up on our website, blenderbros.com. But it's not a difficult add-on. There's just a lot of tools you have to learn how to use and also how they work. So most of my videos kind of cover these tools. So if you're, getting into Blender and want to grab these add-ons, we have plenty of content for that, because I understand it can be tricky to do. Cool, that looks pretty good. Let me mirror that so it's even on both sides. I think that's good enough. We'll go ahead and smart apply that mirror. Cool. Awesome. So this is like roughly like the door outline, and on the inside I want to actually have the door. So it's going to be more or less kind of like sticking out like this. This will be the door. But before I do that, what I actually want to do, let me hide this. I want to fuse these two together. And the best way to fuse two meshes together is to simply use a union boolean. So we do that. Control click on sharpen to apply the boolean. And we're just going to click around here, control click, and just give ourselves a nice bevel. Now I'm trying to keep the poly count, more or less low. There's no need to go like 50 segments on this for a game asset, right? But when you get to the bigger size bevels, it's usually a good idea to go a little bit higher on the segment count, so that way it doesn't look too blocky, kind of like we have here. So maybe on this one I'll give like 8 segments. Nowadays with the modern graphics cards, poly count is nowhere near as important in my opinion. It's generally about memory usage and also just how it looks, right? So I always go for looks, even if it comes at the expense of some additional polygons, right? So you can do something like that. I want to be careful that I don't push too far, because if I do, we'd end up getting an overlap here, and I'd probably have to dissolve out this edge, and it's just going to kind of disrupt that curvature there. So more or less something like this could be enough. Looks good. Now this is a little bit close, so I'm going to use the Mesh Machine unfuck tool. Yes, that's what it's called, because it literally does that. What we can do is actually use that and then just kind of expand the propagation a bit. I guess it's called propagate, whatever. Then kind of get something like that. I don't want it to affect this edge right here, because that's actually holding the curvature of that bevel. So there should be a way to flip which one's being affected. I might be wrong. I don't use this tool too much. Maybe someone who uses Mesh Machine a bit more can tell me. But this is the easiest way, just to kind of get those bevels a little bit more even, and maybe I'll just run a different connection point like that. Should look decent enough. Only issue here is we'll get a pretty nasty shading artifact. Let me add a small holding bevel here and drop a weighted normal. Looks like that shading is actually pretty clean, even though we have a n-gon here on a curved surface. We could even just check with a matte cap real quick. Just kind of see. Yeah, it looks absolutely flawless. So a little bit of a pull right here actually. So let me use a face influence on the bevel, set to affected, and flex that to 100. And just kind of see how that looks. Yeah, it's not too bad. If you're new to my channel, you're going to begin to see very quickly that my #1 goal is to get good shading, not necessarily quote-unquote good topology. I use plenty of n-gons because you can. I'm going to actually set that back to, I'm going to turn off the face influence and actually keep that set to 50. But yeah, my #1 goal is always to get good shading, because at the end of the day, the n-gons don't matter if you're not, flexing or bending or deforming the mesh, unless you have like a very specific pipeline where you need the quads, maybe like VFX or something. So my concern, just good shading and a clean design. I can always triangulate at the end and get everything working nice and clean. So in my opinion, this whole quad-based workflow, especially with new weighted normal modeling techniques and Boolean techniques, it's just completely outdated. Now there are still plenty of situations where I most definitely do use quads, like if I'm trying to run a strip of trim sheets or something, quads can be very powerful, especially for unwrapping and straightening islands. But in general, for just a base model like this, it's not a massive deal. So we're gonna do something like that. Looks good. Then we can go ahead and turn this cube back on, and let's just apply the scale and then Control-Alt-click to select all those. Can make the segment kind of a little bit lower and just get a nice bevel right there. Pretty good. And then all I want to do is scale that up and then maybe run a difference boolean just to kind of get a cutout for the door. And this is where I want the door to be, right inside here. Now check this out. What I can actually do is I can go to Everscroll to recall this cutter. And with these cutters, what you can actually do is Control-click on Mark. And what that's going to do is run a non-destructive chamfer, which we call a reverse bevel. So that way I actually have that chamfer there while still working non-destructively. Now I don't want to go too far with that because I still want to have a little bit of buffer right here. But something like that should be more than enough. It looks clean. And then I can go ahead and Everscroll again and Shift-click on Shade Solid to duplicate it and move it outside of the cutters collection, which is a super powerful setting. I'll make this bevel a little bit smaller too. Could even move that in. Actually, I think it's fine where it was. I'm going to even move it outside of this a little bit so the door is kind of like popping out almost. I think that could be a pretty decent solution. Yeah, this looks really nice so far. I like that. Let me kind of pan around. What I might actually do is, how do I want to do that actually? It's a good question. I actually think I'm going to symmetrize this so to that side. And when I do that symmetry, I'm just going to pull this face out a little bit more. So this is kind of like a connection point for the door or something. You can kind of imagine like there's a, let's scale this down. You can imagine like there's a wall right here and that's kind of like the chamber you would pass through, right? Something like that. Just kind of like using my imagination here, just extending that out a bit should be okay. And it doesn't look like it symmetrized the hole here simply because that's still an active boolean. So when you run symmetry, it only works on real geometry, not what I call theoretical geometry. So stuff that's not applied yet. Cool, so let's go back to this door here and just kind of play with this a little bit more. So one very important concept in visual design is making sure you reuse shapes that you already have. My biggest issue when I first got started and had no idea how to make a clean looking model was I would just put shapes all over the place. Any empty space, put a shape there. And what ends up happening when you just arbitrarily scatter shapes with no rhyme or reason is you get just this clash of details that does not look visually appealing. The best way to get a visually appealing design is to echo elements you already have, cluster details, soften the edges here with bevel. There's so many different solutions to this. We actually cover some of that in our design course if you want to pick that up on our site, but that's one big issue I see is a lot of people don't know how to effectively place details to get the model looking clean, and that's one of the most important things you can do as a 3D artist. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add in another cube here. I'm going to move this up, and this is going to be our window. So this is going to be another boolean, so it doesn't really matter where this is. Just going to put it right there and give myself a nice bevel to kind of echo the bevel we have going on here, right? Then I'm just going to go ahead and run a difference boolean, and just like that we have our window. And just like I did before, it might actually be a good idea to run another reverse bevel here. So just going to control click on mark, just kind of push that out. Let me shift click on sharpen to kind of move to a better angle. That looks really, really clean. Now, a nice and easy way to enhance the aesthetic of your models is to basically take a set of edges that you already have and just kind of make like a little ridge around them. And what I mean by that is, let me make this a little bit smaller. Maybe something like that. And what I could actually do in this case is I could maybe take this face right here, inset these edges. Let me see, why is it? Oh, I need to apply this chamfer right here. So apply that bevel. Could take this face right here and inset it, bevel it so it's just one segment, and watch this. I could press E to extrude, right click to cancel, and then I guess I could just extrude it back actually. Just E to extrude it back, and now we kind of have like this ridge right here, kind of going around the door, which enhances the overall shape, right? So when you look at complex models, just kind of study like where these shapes are placed and just think about it. Is it really as complex as it looks? Usually it's just a ton of simple details added on top of each other strategically. So let me go ahead and let's turn on harden normals by default. Give this a nice little bevel around there. And this is a little bit too close for comfort. Let me scale that down a little bit more. Even more. There we go, it's a lot better. You want to be careful because these things can get really tight. Like for example, this is just right here to here is just too tight. Look at the difference visually. You have this, which is too much going on, and then you have this. It's a lot more just, you know, easy on the eyes, I guess you could say. So positioning is really key. You'll begin to kind of picture like where the best positions are with things the more you model and practice, but you'll just kind of begin to think to yourself or recognize like what looks bad and what doesn't. And you know, we're all still working on that. I still make bad decisions myself. It's just a constant level of improvement, right? Okay, so we have this simple door set up. Nothing crazy. I love Cavity because just look what Cavity does. It just makes a really boring model just pop. It's amazing. Now what I'm actually going to do here is recall this little window cutter and shift click on shade solid because I want to make this into a glass material. And with HardOps, it's really easy. You press Alt M and then you shift click on the add blank material button, and that'll actually make it glass. And let me also take this cutter and pull this face all the way through. And I could also use this cutter on the main mesh. And then we kind of have like it's looking through the door almost, which is kind of cool. Move that back a little bit. Actually, I'm not sure I want to do that quite yet. You can kind of imagine like if you're looking through this window, it's probably going to lead to somewhere, and right now it's just like a tunnel or something. So maybe we'll just leave that alone for right now at least. I think it's alright. And also we kind of have some Z fighting going on since these faces occupy the same space in 3D. So just Alt S in edit mode, scale those a little bit along the normals, and you'll be good to go. Alright, so we have the basic block out of the door here. As you can see, the workflow is really quite simple. I'm just stacking bevels and stacking details and stacking shapes that already exist. Now what I think we could do is start to add some functionality. So we kind of have like a clean shape going on. Now we can begin to think to ourselves, how can we make this look functional? My goal is never to like, oh, put this screw in this specific spot and make sure like the, you know, centimeter difference. Like, I don't care. I've had engineers come to my videos and they're like, oh, technically it needs to be moved like an inch. Like, the whole goal here is to make it look like it works. I'm an artist. I'm not an engineer. I need to use my imagination in these cases and kind of figure out what looks like it works properly, what looks like it's going to function properly, what is believable. The whole idea here is to make this look believable to whoever's playing your game or to whoever's viewing your portfolio, right? That's my main goal here. So if I was looking at one of these doors, maybe it's like in a video game or something, you can usually imagine there's going to be some sort of like mechanism that probably helps like open the door, or maybe like it moves up and down and moves around the door on the inside. It's really down to your imagination, but we can just start adding in some shapes here just to kind of imitate that effect, right? So we're just going to kind of go in here and just work on that. So maybe we could start with a cube, we could bevel it. And I'm going to be moving this around. For right now, I just want to get it in place. We'll go over here. That is a little bit too excessive, I think. So for right now, we'll just kind of get something in place. More or less. Maybe we could, let me turn off overlays. Maybe we could move it like right here. Notice how difference in placement can really make all the difference. This looks a lot more balanced already, and it's really more of a feeling, like an intuitive feeling. It's hard to explain. The more you work, the more you begin to kind of feel where shapes should be positioned. So what I'm going to do here is maybe put that on the bottom, and then this could, I'm not sure where I want to put this one. I don't want to keep it like in the same spot because now it looks a bit too boring and monotone, but and I don't know if I want to block that curve either. For right now, I think this should be enough. I'm also going to run a power save just so I have a second backup here. Looks all right. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is take this piece, Shift D, duplicate it, and scale it a little bit on the Z, and run a difference boolean here, just so we kind of have like a small outline, so it looks like it's sitting in something, right? Give this a small bevel as well, and maybe do something like that. Same idea here. Just duplicate it, scale it a bit on the Z, and do something like that. That looks reasonable. And then maybe I could go over here and just make like a little wedge cut, or just a box cut rather. Press B to bevel, give it, actually I don't want to bevel that, I'll just keep it as it is. And let me just run the bevel again and just press the A key to adjust the angle. Or I guess it's not beveled yet, is it? So we'll just drop a bevel. Should catch that edge, and then same for down here. We already have a bevel on it, so we could do another cut down here maybe. There we go. Looks pretty cool. Alright, so now what we need to do is add a door handle. Now, you want to be careful because in terms of functionality and just real life application, even though this is more of a sci-fi piece, it needs to make sense. Like, you wouldn't put a door handle on the back, right? The door handle needs to be positioned somewhere where a human or whoever is using this door can still access it. So you can get a bit creative here. Maybe it's a button, maybe it's a sensor, maybe it's a door handle. It doesn't matter what it is. Just think about, how would I actually use this in real life? If there's a keypad, put the keypad somewhere in the front where it's reachable. If it's a door handle, make sure it's not like super high where they have to reach up to get it. Put it in an area that makes sense. So for right now, we can just start here. You could even add in like a character into the scene just for reference to kind of figure out like where it should be positioned. And I'll probably do that here in a second. But for right now, I just kind of want, this could be like the door handle, or maybe that could actually work. That actually looks kind of cool. I like that. Let's go in here and, oops. Let me undo that. Let's go in here and sharpen it, make it smooth, and maybe give it one more segment, make it a bit more round. So we can do that, and then maybe here we could also do the same thing. Now it looks a little bit more tucked and realistic. Move that over. And then also take this back face here and just move that in. And maybe move that out a bit more. Actually, where it was fine, I think. Yeah, that looks decent. And let me quickly bring in a character into the scene here. What you could also do is you could just add in a cube if you don't have a character. And I think the average height of I don't know if it's like different in other countries, but at least here in the US, I think it's like 1.8 meters. I might be wrong, don't quote me on that. But what you could do is kind of imagine this is like a human, and you're going to see the scale of the door in this case is actually the one that's off. So what you could do is scale down the door instead until it makes sense, but I don't want to mess with that right now. So my preferred solution is just to bring in a character. You can get these for free off like CG Trader and stuff. So that's probably the best solution there. And then what we can do, just move the human up there, right? And do something like that. Just kind of imagine like roughly where's that door handle going to be, right? That's pretty much all I'm going for. You don't have to overcomplicate it. So that kind of gives us an idea. Okay, let's go in here and let me run let's shift click on curve extract and make like a little handle here or something and scale that. Or what I could do is inset it, invert the selection, and then we kind of have like this thing, whatever you want to call this. Let's invert it a little bit more, or inset it a little bit more. I don't want to go too far because of that bevel, but I think where it is enough. Maybe even where it was before is fine. Okay, let me drop a... Oh shoot, let me apply the solidify modifier first, and then drop a bevel. It's a really small bevel, nothing crazy. And that looks pretty good. And then maybe just move that over a little bit on the Y just to kind of make a little bit of variation or something. Looks good. And you know, maybe what I could do is I could rotate this a bit on the Z so it's kind of angled and it's like something you press in, and just cut this part off. And just rotate that in a little bit more. So maybe this is like something you press in, and then we could even inset this. Do something like that. No, it looks awful. We are not doing that. Just gave it a try. I'll play with that a little bit later. For right now, that's definitely not a priority. But what we do need is a little bit of a cutout here in the door, because right now, if you take a look, if this door were to open, it's just like there's no area for it to pass through this handle, right? So you can always just duplicate these pieces and remove the bevel before you run a Boolean. Alt S, and then just run a difference Boolean on the door. And now you can kind of imagine, like, if this door pulls out or something, it kind of passes through that handle. So you can kind of play with it that way. Could even move that in. I'm not really sure I like how that looks though. And I'm going to make this entire handle here a little bit smaller. So we'll just kind of move that up. And then take the cutter and move that up as well. Yeah, that's not too bad. Cool, so I'm really liking how this is coming along. I'm probably going to make some adjustments, of course. You don't get everything first try, and you're always going to finish a model and think or wish you did certain things differently, of course, but just get as much done as you can, and try not to regret your decisions, because sometimes you're like, damn, I wish I could have done it this way instead, but at that point you're already like done with the model, right? No, I'm not going to do that. I just noticed I need to make this cutter a little bit higher up and a little bit more out, and then maybe I could take these two pieces and kind of pull that to just kind of exaggerate that effect right there. I'm not sure how much I like that, but more or less something like that. And then just Control A, apply the scale. And it's looking pretty good. You know, I was kind of thinking about it. What if I put like our branding logo here? I can make like a Boolean out of it and then maybe bake it later. Not sure if I'm going to do the baking yet. We'll have to see it. There's some stuff we could bake, so maybe. So what I could do maybe is I could kind of engrave some text. So let me first apply the scale and bevel this a bit. And maybe make this a little bit smaller, I guess. And then I could even union it to this piece. And let's go here to this Boolean. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bevel that like that. Maybe even move this out a bit more, just for some more space, more buffer. Make the bevel even bigger, like that. Now it's a little bit too top heavy. That's pulling a lot of attention. So instead of doing that, I think a much better solution would simply be to just straight up engrave the text. So I could add in some text here. Text is always a very good element to bake just because the topology can get really, really nasty and cause some issues. So I tend to bake the text by just removing it for the low poly. But what I could do here is you can also load in like fonts and stuff. It's really cool. This is my favorite font, Oasis. And we could do like Bros. Actually, maybe putting our branding Blender Bros stuff wouldn't make sense here, but maybe it could be like something a bit more natural, like Unit 02 or something. Because maybe this is like the entrance to something a bit more exciting than our branding, right? Then we could just put it right here in the middle. I could also just selection the cursor, move that up, and then move this out. And then once you're happy with that, just apply the visual geometry to mesh. And what we can do is run a limited dissolve because that can get really nasty, the text here. And for some reason, T's never work very well. I don't like using text too much in Blender for this reason, but I think it would look really clean if it were engraved. So what I'm actually going to do here is take this edge, subdivide it, and then actually get this connected. Or It's a little bit tricky here. This always confuses me. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete the faces, only faces, and just figure out what the heck is going on. There we go. And then I can fill it. And I think that's the only one with an issue. We could probably make these connection points here a little bit better as well. Like I said, if we bake this, life's going to be way easier, so I'm not too worried. But at least I could make this a little bit better up front. And I think this should all be okay. Cool, so I'm going to go ahead and extrude this back and just recalculate the normals just in case. And we can either, what are the two terms? There is engraving and there's like the opposite. I suck with those terms. We could try just doing a union to that together. That's actually kind of cool. I think what we could do is, I like the engrave there, it looks nice. You're going to see, unfortunately, the bevel just kind of collapses due to the connection points we have going on here. This is why I'm not a big fan of text here in Blender, but what we could try to do is maybe run a knife cut straight on through, like that, and see if that helps at all. Helps a little bit. Maybe what I'll do now is run a cut from here to, how do I want to do that? Could join that together. Does that do anything? That kind of helps. Let's move that across. Like I said, this will be baked, so that should be fine. There we go, that looks alright. I like that. I think this engraving right here with no like backplate or anything is a little bit more natural. I think the backplate idea, like with a cube here and just put up here, I think it's a little bit too heavy in terms of the attention it pulls. I don't want to pull too much attention away from the actual design. I mean, I guess this could work. I'm kind of in the middle on that one, but I really like how this looks, and I think that could work as well. I think this one would really boil down to personal preference, honestly. Now, what I want to try to do here is maybe, let me think how I want to do it. What I could try is using a Mesh Machine offset. So I could go in here and run the offset tool. It's going to kind of collapse right around this area. That's totally normal. The main reason I want to do this is because I just want to quickly test and see how this might look on the bottom, like that kind of shape. Actually looks, I actually like that. It's not too bad. Kind of enhances the overall aesthetic here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to press Q, Operations, and shift click on Smart Apply to Smart Apply Duplicate. Run a sharpen on that. We're just going to throw this one away once we're done. But I basically want to take this entire, I'll just take from here to here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to offset it. Then just take this. Let me dissolve this out. I guess I can't. Not really a big deal. Like I said, we're about to throw this away anyways, so I could just do a bevel right here as well. And then I could literally just take this portion, invert the selection, delete faces, and now I kind of have this thing. Cool. So now what I could actually do is symmetrize that over, merge these at the center, and now we can actually use this as a boolean without having to mess with the topology and just make things, you know, crazy. So we could do that. And difference. That actually looks pretty cool. Well, that looks really cool, actually. I like that. And you know what else I could try? Maybe on this cutter, I could like chop it off right here. And it just kind of like, let me hide that. Then we just kind of have something like that, which is just like in one corner. That's kind of cool. We could even just run to Everscroll, apply that boolean, and perhaps we could take this face right here and just like, I don't know if this will look good. I'm just trying to copy this angle right here. That kind of pulls a bit too much attention. I don't think it looks natural. I think this will be enough. I could even try running the cut this way instead. So we have this one. Yeah, this one's pretty good. And let's try maybe doing the same thing on this upper side. So once again, shift click Smart Apply, can steal this extra piece. We're going to toss it in a second. So for right now, I just want to maybe just offset some extra portions. I can do something like that, and then maybe I could take from here to here. Bevel that. Invert the selection, delete faces, and now we can use this, just like we did before, and just, what the heck? There we go. Extrude it back, and run our difference boolean again. That looks pretty nice. I like that. I want this to push down a little bit more, so let me take this piece and add a global orientation to that face. So I can actually move it along that axis and just extend it a bit. And then I'll just remove that. I don't need it. So it's a little bit different. This one's a bit more extended. This one's a bit more localized. And I think that looks really clean in terms of the form. So I like what we have here so far. The only thing I don't like is how blocky these pieces are here in comparison to the rest of the mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recall this cutter right here, and I'm going to shift click on this piece, and we're just going to go ahead and take these edges and take these edges and just bevel them, and just we could do something like that. It's not too bad. Or we could do a chamfer. Let's see how the chamfer looks first. It's not too bad. We can try that. We can also try a rounder one, just see how that looks. I think they're both okay. I kind of prefer the chamfer, so I'm going to go with that. That looks good, and then we can go ahead and box select again. Just make sure you're only selecting these portions, and we can go ahead, unmark that, and then just give this maybe like 3 segments to make that a bit more round. Move this over a little bit, and there we go. Same idea for this one, just going to recall this cutter, shift click on the actual piece, and just box select these two, and give that a nice chamfer as well. It looks like I need to actually apply the scale so that bevel's even. Okay, then we'll go ahead and, how's that look? Just move it back a little bit. Much better. These rounded edges here just kind of follow the overall form and flow of this door a little bit more, which is kind of why I wanted to do that. So just a very simple adjustment, but it makes it look a hell of a lot better. Cool, so we're kind of nearing the end of this thing. I'm not trying to go like crazy far in this because I want to, make this video as easy to understand as possible without just, modeling for 10 hours. So what I do want to do, however, is make like a, kind of want to extend the cutter here for the actual door. So let me take this back face, and I think it's already cutting through, and let me just run a difference boolean here as well. I think we'll actually leave it as it is, but what we could do differently here is we could maybe cut like a hallway or something, so we can cut straight through. And you're going to kind of see when we do that, it kind of looks like the door will open, then it kind of brings it into some sort of hallway, I guess you could call it. So I'm just going to give this a few segments here. We'll just kind of see how that looks. Keep in mind, like, the whole point of this thing is not to necessarily see it from the back because, the character will probably just walk through it, but just to have something that's going to go against a wall really nicely. So you're going to see the door right here. I want to make this cutter a little bit wider, so let's press S and then Y. Scale it to about the size of the door, something like that. Apply the scale. And let's just kind of see how that looks. You can kind of imagine, like, maybe, there could be a few different ways you have the door go. Let me uniquify everything. Cool. So, maybe the door pulls out or something, which would be kind of a weird functionality. Or maybe the door is actually quite thin, in which case we could actually go in here and just kind of cut up to this point. And maybe the door will actually be able to, like, rotate open in some way. Maybe we could move it back and kind of have like a hinge or something, so the door is kind of like elongated outwards. There's so many different solutions here. Just kind of use your imagination, figure out what you think will work for you. And in this case, I'm going to actually scale that back in a little bit, Or maybe I need to do that to the door. So you're going to kind of see, maybe I'll just leave it where it is. But really what I want here is some sort of like, mechanism that kind of rotates the door open. So maybe I could go in here and add in, we'll just do like a 20 segment cylinder. Should be enough while still being relatively round. We can kind of go in here, S and then Shift Z, and then we're just going to kind of put like some sort of little hinge or something. Right. You could also use references for actual doors like this if you wanted to. But for right now, I'm not going to go like super crazy or anything. Just trying to see what might work and what might not work. It might actually be a good idea here to kind of cut in a little bit of space for those. Which is just kind of, that clutters up the entire form a bit too much. So maybe what I'm going to do is move this over here. Scale that a bit on the Z. Maybe move this over just to that location instead. And then maybe, I don't know if I even want this one, to be honest. Just go ahead and delete that one out. So maybe instead of, this piece being like right here and kind of disrupting the form, maybe there's like a mechanism on the inside of this piece here that kind of helps to rotate out the door. Like I said, it's all about the implied functionality, making it look believable. You don't have to actually set everything up perfectly. It just has to make sense. So what I could do is maybe move the 3D cursor like right here, and then we can just kind of pretend, this door was opening. It could kind of open like this, right? That's not too bad. I wish there was a little bit more walk-in space, but this could definitely work. We could even move this one out a little bit, right? Same with these little handles right here, so the door is kind of like protruded outwards a little bit, and then it could kind of rotate from that direction, but then it's not really against the piece. So you got to kind of play with it and figure out what works for you. I much prefer the door sitting right on the inside, extended out just a little bit. Also, the door could perhaps, rotate inwards, in which case you're going to have to actually make like a room for that to happen. So I think in this situation, the best use case would be for the door to kind of open like that, right? And then the, character just walks through. Or your other option is to maybe align it with, let's see. Will that 3D cursor snap there? Yes, it will. So maybe align it with that back edge instead. So now when it rotates open, it kind of rotates a little bit more on the inside. You can kind of see how that works. Only issue here is it now begins to intersect with the actual little unit right here. So maybe instead of that, we'll just go ahead and keep it where it was. I think that was definitely a decent location. But it looks like we are going to have a little bit of a space right here. So I think we're going to have to at least put some sort of indication that there's like a, mechanism that helps rotate that. So I'm not going to go super crazy with it, because really what's going to happen is when this opens, the viewer is probably not going to even notice it, but at least they have like something here just to kind of indicate that, hey, this is how it's opening, right? So let me undo that and just try to find a good position for it without disrupting the form too much, because if I pull this out, it becomes a little bit too distracting, right? So somewhere on the inside is going to be where we roughly want it. You're just going to kind of see the issue there. So maybe I could even move that back so a little bit more, and then try to rotate it again. And it looks like we're just going to have to move this up a little bit more right before it reaches the outside. And then I think we'll be in a good position for this to kind of, make sense, kind of like that. Now I do want to make this very clear. If you are going to use this in a game or something, or perhaps you want to do like some interior renders, when this opens, there's not much of a design on the inside of this door, so I would highly recommend that you actually add some additional details on the inside here, and maybe even some additional details on the inside of this little piece right here as well, just to make this whole piece look significantly more exciting, right? Because if the character is going to walk through it, you don't want the wall to be like crazy empty or anything. And you certainly don't want the inside of this door just to be like blank like this. You kind of want to add a little bit more stuff to it. Now I think at that point I've given you enough modeling material and tools for you to do basically the same thing we've been doing for this entire tutorial. So just in interest of keeping this video a little bit more short, I'll leave this as an exercise to you to maybe take the door, you can isolate it with / on the numpad, and maybe make your own design on the other side. So just go to the back view, right? And you can just make your own design on this side. Maybe you could even like, you know, perhaps inset this and then bevel these, right? And then just make some additional details on the inside like that. Totally up to you. I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you to do because it shouldn't be anything super complicated, but I do want to keep this video relatively short, or at least reasonable time. So that should be pretty fun for you to do on your own. So go ahead and give it a try. So since I'm going to be using this as an art piece, what I actually want to do is, instead of having this massive like just cut out here, doesn't really look cool through the window, what I'm actually going to do is delete this. So ever scroll, I'm going to delete it from there, but I'm not going to delete it from the actual door that we cut, because we kind of have like an isolation chamber on the inside or something, whatever you want to call it. So maybe what I could do instead is just make a little bit more of a localized cut right here. So I'll just cut through, maybe bevel it. And then what I could do is perhaps scale this a bit on the Y. And now if we kind of look through here, you're going to see it kind of indicates like there's a chamber on the inside. I should probably also make this window smaller. Cut that and apply it. So I actually just scrapped like an extra like over 1 hour of recordings here because I was just kind of playing with this design, and you'll notice when you begin to texture things, even if the design looks cool in Blender, it still might not be quite there. I think we're just missing a few little things to kind of spice it up a bit. So what I want to do here is I want to maybe make some additional details here on this pipe. So maybe what we could do is drop a loop cut, Control B, give it a good extrusion here. Alt S to do that, offset it even. And then maybe what I could do is I could scale that a bit on the Z and just kind of make like an interesting effect here. Make like a cutout like that. And let me shift click on sharpen, adjust the shading on that. Let's give this just a 1 segment bevel. We'll fix that shading stuff later. It shouldn't be a big deal right now. What I will do is just try to align this up with these vertices there, so I can at least kind of retopologize that to somewhat minimize the shading issues, but for right now that should be fine. So, you know, we could do something like this, and maybe what we could do next is I have a pretty good idea. So let me ever scroll, and let me scroll up to this cutter right here. What I'm going to do is Shift D to duplicate it, tab into edit mode, select everything, and then Alt S to scale along normals here. And I'm just going to run a simple slice operation on the actual door. So now we kind of have like an outline like that. And then same exact idea on this one down here. Going to go ahead, Shift D. Let's scale this up a bit, Alt S, and then we'll run another slice operation over here as well. Looks a little bit more appealing. What I also want to do is maybe make a few little like details here. The reason I want to do this is because it's actually going to enhance the design, because what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to kind of like add in tertiary and secondary level colors to kind of emphasize the overall form a bit more. So even if these pieces don't mean much, they can actually make the design look quite a bit more interesting to the viewer. So I'm just going to kind of drop some stuff in there. Trying to think of what else I could do. Maybe on the sides here, let me fill this in with the F key. And then I'm going to run a Boolean selection to Boolean operation here, so I can kind of inset that. Pull that in. And then kind of have an effect like that. And then maybe on the sides here, what I could do is I could simply use the N-Gon cutter with cyclic turned off and make some like trussing effects here. Kind of do something like that. And just see if that looks interesting, which it kind of does. And I'm just going to go ahead and just move this back a little bit more. Kind of like that. And then let's just go ahead and apply the let's apply, well, first of all, let's take this boolean and this boolean and apply that. We can leave this one live, that's fine. That one should be okay. That's the solidification for the actual cut, so we'll leave that alone. And now what I can actually do is maybe make some, I could apply the solidification actually, because I'm done with it. And what I could do now is maybe bevel these, give this a few segments. Now, like I said, on more obtuse angles, you can generally go with a smaller angle. And on more acute angles like this, you have to go wider so it doesn't mess up. And generally on these, you also want to use an extra segment, otherwise the auto smooth might not catch. So just an FYI there. So same for this one and yeah, this one here. Dissolve that out, then go ahead and scroll down a bit. Make those bigger. This one's going to have to be a bit bigger than this one here, kind of in the middle. And there we go. And let me actually undo that real quick. Right here, I think I'm just going to dissolve out all these edges. Actually, maybe not. I'll just do a very small, subtle bevel right here, just enough to catch it. And then once we hit that edge, we can go ahead and just press 3 with machine tools, or if it doesn't catch, just press Control X to dissolve out that other edge there. And that should be plenty. But right here is kind of what I was worried about. We're probably going to end up catching the bevel, so you might need to even use an extra segment to avoid that. There we go. That should be, I think, decent enough. Alright, so now what I can do, instead of mirroring the actual piece, because it's not symmetrical, we're going to end up getting the cuts on that side. Instead of mirroring the actual piece, we can just mirror the cutter instead. So we'll press Alt-X, and I could just mirror over this piece by shift-clicking it, Alt-X, and then mirror, and now it's going to be on that side as well. And this just kind of makes the design look a little bit more visually appealing in my opinion, and we could probably even bake that detail. Now let me try one thing. Let me go in here, move these faces back, and try running a reverse bevel, so Control click on mark. I'm not sure if I'll like it, but only one way to find out. I actually kind of do like that. Looks a little bit cleaner in my opinion, so I'm going to leave that one as it is. Looks good. And alright, I definitely knew something was missing, so although I did scrap like an hour of this footage, I think it was worth it because I just felt like I ended the design a bit quicker than I should have. And that's an issue I've always struggled with. I always think I'm at the end, but as a general rule of thumb, if you think you're finished, you're probably not. Put in like another 30%, and you'll probably end up being really happy with how the design looks. This is looking pretty clean. I'm trying to kind of picture how the texturing and stuff like that's going to look in Substance Painter. But for right now, I'm not too concerned about it. Now what I might do is go up here to the Hard Ops panel, and under this little favorite icon, I'm going to turn on the blank material similar to Viewport. And this will basically give random materials of some sort of gray shading. So I can maybe select this piece and press Alt-M and kind of cycle through these different gray colors and get like a slight highlight there. So this would be material 002. I could give this one the same thing. Maybe the door handle, I could give the same thing as well. Just to kind of spice up the interest a bit here. Maybe same for this one. And just really begin to see how it looks, or maybe for the door, make that gray, but I just kind of want to add some highlighting effects here, so I think this should be enough. Maybe this piece in here as well. Now what I might do is take this pipe that's on the inside and maybe move a loop cut down here, Control B to bevel it, E to extrude, and then run Alt S. Just kind of see how that looks. That could kind of work. Maybe I could even symmetrize that. And actually, no, I don't like that. I think that'll be decent enough, not too worried about it. And then maybe on this pipe down here, I could even drop another small little bevel in there. Do another one of these. Just kind of spicing up the design a bit, making it look a little bit more visually appealing to the viewer. And maybe I'll even move that down a bit. Looks pretty good. And then maybe same idea, I could do like a, let me go back to box cutter, cut through, and then press the V key to array, and then press X to flip the axis, maybe do like 2 of those or something, just to kind of spice it up. And maybe for this door right here, what I could do is take all these outer edges and just give it a small chamfer, see if it looks good. It's actually not too bad. I could even try this one instead. It's actually pretty decent, but if I'm going to do that, I'm going to also scale this one down and also make sure that these faces here, they need to be scaled in a little bit more. So Alt S and just kind of bring those in. And maybe even scale this a little bit on the Z and apply the scale. Yeah, it looks a little bit cleaner. And what I might even try is taking these faces here and setting them and then extruding them back a little bit and just see if that outline kind of makes a difference, which kind of does. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So yeah, you know, these small little adjustments you make here can really make or break the entire visual appeal of the design. So I always recommend, you know, spend a few extra minutes doing these things because it really can just make all the difference and make the viewer a lot more connected with the design. So I think that's good where it was. Trying to think of what else we could do here. You know, we don't necessarily need to overdo it, but I definitely want to make sure that before we do all the optimizing and unwrapping and stuff like that, that it's actually done, because if we have to redo it again, it's going to be a headache. So you know what maybe I'll do is I'll come in here and run a slice maybe on that side, maybe make it a little bit bigger actually, just to kind of bring some additional visual appeal on that area. And I guess I could do the same thing here technically. Just depends how far I want to bring that one in. And I'm not sure what that is. I think it's just a shading issue from this thing. We'll just scale that up a bit. We're going to be fixing those issues here shortly, so don't worry too much about it, but it kind of makes it pop a bit more. I do want to move this so it's about the same size as the right side. You know what, I'm just going to undo it. I'm not sure I like that very much. Now what I kind of want to do on the window here, I'm not sure if it's going to look good or not, but let me try making a slice around it. Just a very small, subtle effect there. So what I can do is cut through, B to bevel, and then press the X key. I just want to see if like a window frame would look, you know, interesting or not. It actually kind of does. The only issue is there's not much room to work with it. So I just want to be careful as to where I position this thing. So maybe what I'll do here is move this over a little bit on the Y, move it down a little bit on the Z. It doesn't have to match perfectly, but just, you know, more or less kind of in the center. And maybe I could adjust the bevel here. I don't need too many segments, but, you know, just enough to kind of match it. And something like that could be cool. And then we'll go ahead and just drop in a material. And that kind of brings in a little bit more visual appeal to the entire thing. A little bit tight, not too much room here, but I think we can get away with it. Any more than that, and I probably would just scale the window down a bit more. But I think that's reasonable. That one's fine. Now what I might do here on the bottom is just make a few little notches, just, I don't know, just kind of playing with shapes here, right? Could do something like this. And then I could maybe just mirror it across like that. Just adding different shapes here. And this is already looking a heck of a lot better than just a few minutes ago. So I'd say we're nearing the end of this design, but I know I keep saying that, but I'll probably just keep finding more things I want to add. So let's just see. I'm just kind of curious how it would look if I had like a echoed effect like that. I think it would be a bit too distracting. I might just leave the back just neutral as it is. I think it's fine. Now, one thing that's kind of bothering me here is if you look at this this little notch right here, it's kind of very just straight and linear compared to the nice curvy shapes this actual model has. So what I'm going to do is recall this cutter and just bevel it. Now I could just press Q and then bevel it right now, but watch what happens. Notice it kind of bevels and we end up getting this type of like, see how it's kind of like beveled right there? So what I'm going to do instead is just pull this face out a little bit more so that way that bevel doesn't actually hit unless I make the bevel really big. So let me just turn off overlays so I can just see how many segments I need for that bevel to go away. So maybe this many is alright. I could even turn on wireframe just to kind of see, because I might dissolve it down later. This should be probably enough, like that. Cool. And now you're going to see, just look at the difference now. Notice how much more soft and visually appealing this looks in relation to the rest of the mesh compared to this. See the difference? Looks a lot better. It just matches this curvy aesthetic a lot more, which is exactly what I want. So I'm going to do the same thing for this bottom one. Let me go ahead and recall the cutter, pull this face out a bit, and then we'll just go ahead and bevel it. And just do something kind of like that. Doesn't have to be super big, but you can already see the big difference here. Now I also want to make sure these pieces are lined up because this one's extended a bit further out compared to this one. So what I'm going to do is just go into vertex snap, press G, Y, and hold Control to snap it there, which is a little bit too close, isn't it? Let's just see how much room we have. We still have a decent amount of room, but yeah, I think we'll do that. And then what we can also do is take the cutter and move that back as well. This slice operation and then the actual cutter behind it here. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to delete that. I don't even think I'm using that cutter for anything. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and delete that one. That's fine. Alright, so this is already looking a lot better. We have a nice cluster of details here on the left and then a nice balanced design here in the middle and also the handle here on the right. So this is looking pretty good. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I want to add because there almost always is, but it's too late before I kind of figure out what that is. But totally normal process of modeling. There's always going to be a hindsight there that you wish you did. Just be happy with the model that you have, and once you're happy with it, just kind of accept it, you know, say there's probably going to be something I wish I added in later on, but I'm just going to accept that and be happy with what I have right now. Alright, so what I want to do real quick is fix up this shading issue. Now, of course, when you run booleans on curved surfaces, you're always going to get a bit of a headache, but what I'm going to do here is let's take this boolean and just kind of merge together these vertices. This shouldn't disrupt the curvature too much, but actually before I do that, let me put a holding loop here to isolate the shading, and then maybe just take this cutter and move it just a little bit more to the right like that. You know, alternatively, what I could do is I could simply, you know, take these loops and just, you know, control click around and just do an extrusion. You know, it's basically the same thing, just don't have to really do any retopology, so that could work as well, but you will get some shading artifacts simply because as a result of the bevel, you're going to see without the bevel it's fine, but with it, it actually spans out into an n-gon right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vertices, right? So what I usually do in these cases is just kind of tighten it up with a loop cut. I'm more concerned about the shading, so there we go, a little bit better. But, you know, another option is to simply not put a bevel here, and sometimes I'll do this on areas where it's not really that much of a difference, but this kind of pops a bit more, and the shading is very minor, so I'm actually going to leave it as it is. And then same idea for these right here. Let me quickly take these, let's scale this, and let's also just move that into a more ideal location, so something like that, a little bit better. And then all I really want to do is I want to put a loop cut here to tighten that shading a bit, and then put a loop cut here, and then I want to put 2 right here, and then I can simply apply this boolean and then maybe just do a little bit of retopology just to kind of help the bevel out a little bit. Not super necessary, but because the triangulation later is going to pick it up, but you can just do it now. You're going to see that's quite a bit better. And I just noticed right here, I kind of have this thing intersecting. I could cut it out, but it actually kind of looks cool, not gonna lie. I could cut through this, but I'm trying to think. That actually kind of looks somewhat interesting in there, so I might actually leave that alone. The upper one's fine, so I think we're about ready to optimize this thing. So you're probably wondering, how exactly do we optimize this? Well, if you're following along with our what we call the MAD-T framework, it stands for modeling, automation, decimation, and triangulation. These are the 4 pillars of a functioning hard surface game asset. Now we've already done the modeling process here. The next process would technically be decimation, but we don't really have much to decimate here because I already went with a low segment count on all the bevels. So we can actually do is just go right into automation, which is basically unwrapping. And the way I unwrap is by automating most of the process. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is save a separate copy. So I'll just run a power save. And then what I want to do is make some collections here. So I'm going to make a new collection. And I'm going to call this collection low. And then make a new one and call this collection high. So we're going to have a low poly and a high poly. So I'm going to select everything. Press M and then move this to the high poly collection. So we can turn this off and on. And then I'm going to select everything and duplicate it all. And we're going to move this one to the low poly collection. So now we have 2 duplicates. So we have the high poly and the low poly. And obviously we have to make this low poly. So let's begin the work on that. So the very first thing you want to consider whenever you're just trying to optimize this thing is you want to figure out which areas can I bake and which areas can I kind of reduce down the poly count on. Now we've mostly done this because we used a low segment count on the bevels, but for example, on this area, I could maybe decimate this down by dissolving these edges here. So Control X, make that a little bit lower poly, but pretty much everything else is fine. I could do the same thing in the back here. Dissolve all that out. So Control X, but I think that's about as far as we're going to get. Now the next thing we want to consider is which areas are cut out on a flat face. As long as there's areas on a flat face that aren't cutting all the way through, kind of like this back piece, you can bake that. So for example, what I usually like to do is I like to go to each of these booleans here and just turn them off and on and figure out which ones I should apply and which ones I can remove. So for example, right here, this kind of defines the form, so I'm going to apply that. This one right here, I have no clue what this is. So let me just apply it. This one right here, this can be baked. Gonna remove that. This little line down here, we can bake that, so we'll remove it. This line up here can be baked, we can remove that as well. This cuts all the way through, so we have to make sure we apply those. Same with this one. Same with the slice operation. What else? Same with this slice operation down here. Apply that. And then we have one more boolean here, which seems to be these little notches. Now these notches can be baked, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove that and then just delete these little pieces because that'll be able to be baked from the high poly. Okay, cool. So now what we have here, we have another boolean for the side. These could actually be baked quite well because they don't cut too far through. Generally, if these cuts were any deeper, I would probably opt for just applying it, but I think since these are so minor and not really that far in, we could actually remove that and bake it. And then we have one more boolean here, and I have no clue which one this is. These little notches down here, these could also be baked. Technically, we'll get a little hovering line right here, but it's going to be very unnoticeable, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove those as well. Now, I could have technically applied this slice operation right here, but I think it's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and just smart apply operations and smart apply that. And then right here, operations and smart apply that one as well. And then we're just going to basically just check everything else. So no booleans on these, no booleans on this. This boolean we can apply. And same for this one here. And I think that's about it. Now what I like to do before unwrapping is I like to go piece by piece and just see if there's any issues we need to sort. So for example, like right down here, notice we have a slight shading artifact going across because of where this cut is. So what I'm going to actually do is dissolve out these edges right here. It's not going to make much of a difference. And then maybe just join that up. Or not. I guess we can leave that one alone. It should triangulate fine anyways. I could also technically... Actually, no, I'm going to leave that one alone. But up here, for example, I can maybe dissolve this down a bit. if I wanted to. It's not going to make much of a difference, but I'm just kind of showing you the process. Could dissolve these two. And now what I want to do is just merge these near miss vertices together. So with machine tools, shift 1, merge that one there, and that should be decent enough. Cool. And I'm just going to kind of pan around, see what else we have going on. Not too much. It's actually pretty good. Maybe in here I could decimate that down a bit, but a little bit too far. I'll leave that alone. Okay, so that one looks good. I'm going to go ahead and go back into global view and hide that. For the door here, the door's fine as well. Let me actually apply the boolean on it. And that one's good. And then I think the rest of these pieces should all be fine. We'll just apply the boolean on this window frame. And I think we're good to go. The reason we want to apply the booleans is because before we unwrap everything, all the booleans need to be applied, so that way we actually have access to that geometry on those booleans. So let me press Alt-H, bring everything back, and what we're going to do is just begin the unwrapping process. Now I personally prefer unwrapping one piece at a time. So what I do is I just isolate the view with / on the numpad. I'm going to add a new material, and I'm going to call this one UVs just so I know what it is. You can name it whatever you want though. We're going to go into the shader editor, add in an image texture, and then just make this whatever resolution you want. I'll make it 4K. You can name it whatever you want. And then set the generated type here to UV grid, and then connect this up to the base color. That's all you have to do. So now if we go into material mode, we're going to see a preview of our UVs, which currently are just absolute crap. So let me show you how I automate the unwrapping. It's very easy to do, and there's two ways to do it. The more native way to do it would be to go to select, and then select sharp edges, and then right click, mark seam. Now the other way to do it is with hard ops, which is a bit quicker. Press Ctrl-tilde and just make sure you have the seam option turned on, okay? So we're going to click on that, and it's basically going to do the same thing. It's going to, whenever we sharpen it, it's going to apply those seams on any of the sharp edges here. Pretty easy. Now what I also want to do is go here to the workspace panel under options and turn on the live unwrap feature, so that way whenever we update our seams, it will automatically get unwrapped for us. So let's go ahead and select everything and press U and then unwrap, and we're going to change the method here to conformal. You almost always want to use conformal for hard surface objects and angle based for more organic or semi-organic objects, okay? So this is pretty much all hard surface, so we're going to go ahead, set that to conformal, and now we have to clean it up a bit. You're going to see we get some distortions here on the top, and basically what we want to do is kind of imagine, since we have a big bevel right here, we need to pretend this was a sharp edge. So if we didn't have a bevel here, where would that sharp edge be? And that would probably just be around here somewhere. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a seam all the way down this portion up to here, and then right click and mark that seam. And then we have to continue up through this one as well and mark that seam. So right click, mark seam. We're going to do the same exact thing on the back here. I can just Alt-Shift click everything. All the way up. Mark the seam. Much better. Now let me show you why we have this nasty distortion here on the top. If I go into face mode and press the L key, and I go into the UV editor, you're going to see we have this thing that kind of resembles a ring. And if you've seen my other videos before, you probably already know what this means. It kind of looks like a ring. Imagine you have a sheet of paper and you tape it together. It's going to form a ring of paper, right? Now, if you cut that paper where you taped it, you can flatten it out. And basically the same way to cut in terms of UVs is to use a seam. So in order to avoid this ring formation, we're just going to put a seam somewhere here on the bottom where we can't really see it. So maybe right here, you can mark that seam, and you're going to see it's a lot better. We also have a little bit of distortion right here, so we're probably going to need to put a seam on the bottom as well, maybe right here, like that. And that's quite a bit better. A little bit rotated, but not too big of a deal for the materials we're going to be using. Honestly, what I might even do is put some seams here just to split it up a bit more. We're not going to really see the top or bottom of this piece, so it doesn't really matter how many seams you put. The more you can split up your islands, the more UV space you're going to be able to use. So maybe we'll do something like that. And we're never going to see those seams, so not really a big deal. And it kind of projects it a bit better. So we just have to go around to all the pieces that have a ring. So like usually examples like this, you're going to have a ring. So we'll just go ahead and put a seam here. It can be the top or bottom. Like that. The inside here is fine. Same for this portion. And I think we're pretty much good. What we can do is select everything and just make sure we don't have any rings. And actually we do right here. Let me turn this on. Press the L key. And you're going to see we also have a ring right here. Now what we can also do is we can actually remove seams on any chamfers. They're pretty much redundant, so I'm going to go ahead, clear that one out, and then maybe just put a seam from here to here, connecting these together. So we're going to mark a seam, and you're going to see that unwrap is much cleaner now. Now I'd highly recommend, if you haven't yet, picking up our Hard Surface Game Asset 2.0 course. It shows pretty much the entire process and also goes a bit more into our MAD-T framework, a bit more in depth, so that way you can understand these concepts a bit more intuitively. So pick that up. I'll probably put it in the description, but if I don't, just go to blenderbros.com. The course is on there, and it's a fantastic resource to add to your tool belt. Anyways, this is a very clean unwrap. I like it. We're going to go ahead and hide it. And actually, before we hide it, let's select everything. And in the material menu, we can go here and copy that material to everything else. So now we'll maybe go to the door. Same idea. We're going to sharpen it, unwrap it, make sure it's set to conformal. And let's take care of this ring right here. Put a seam on that area. Maybe remove one of these chamfer seams here. Like that. Maybe we could remove this. I'm not sure how it'll look. A little bit too warped. I'm going to leave that one alone. And this is pretty much good enough. We can straighten this out. Actually, maybe not because we have n-gons, but we'll go over that a bit later. There's a tool that we can use to straighten out islands that are a bit rotated. But for right now, actually what I'm going to do is just Q, operations, and then sharpen everything at once. So that way I don't have to keep marking the seam on each of them. So right here we only have one ring, which is around here on this area. So we're just going to put a seam on the bottom, call it a day. And then for this one, same idea. We're just going to unwrap it. Going to put a seam here on the bottom. We have another ring on the inside, but first let me remove the chamfer seam. Mark the seam there, and that should be clean. And then this one's pretty much good enough. I could remove the chamfer seam here technically. So let me just go ahead and do that. We'll just control click all the way through. Oops. All the way through there. Clear that one out, and this one's good enough for me. And same for this one, just going to go ahead and maybe put a seam here on the bottom. And we can straighten those out later. That's good enough. Going to hide that. And then only a few more left. So for this piece right here, not too much we really need to do on this one. Same for this piece, probably not too much we're going to have to do on here. This is a little bit skewed, so what I'm going to do is actually put a seam maybe. Put a seam here maybe, I don't know. Another option is to maybe just use a project from view, but it might not capture everything. So even though I could do project from view bounds, it's probably not going to give us the exact result we want. Yeah, I didn't think so. So maybe what I'll do here is just put a seam on that area, put one there, and depends how much I care about that distortion, but for right now that's fine. Right here should be easy as well. Just do a quick unwrap. And since this is a cylinder, we can actually remove the top and bottom caps. We're not going to see those, so we can remove those. And then we're just going to need a seam all the way through the back here. So we can mark that, and then maybe remove some of these additional chamfer seams we have going on. Let's just remove this one, and then actually this one and this one. And maybe this one and this one. You don't have to be too picky here. You can't really see too much of these. I'm just trying to see what works the best. So this one might work, and then that might work as well. Cool, so that's clean enough. And then for this one, I don't think we're going to see the caps. Let's see. We're kind of going to see the bottom, so all I need to do here I just put a seam through the back, and then maybe I can remove this seam and this seam. And let me unwrap it again. Interesting. I think this needs to be an angle based or maybe conformal. Something's missing here. Not too sure what it is. I'm not going to bother with it right now. I think it's actually since the scale is not applied. Make sure you apply the scale. Control A, apply scale. Otherwise you might run into weird issues like that. But you're not going to really see too much of that piece, so I'm not too concerned about the seams. Okay, right here. Do a quick unwrap on that. And this should be the last one. Do a quick unwrap on this one, and then maybe just drop some seams in to make it a little bit cleaner. Not going to worry too much about that one. Cool. Alright, so now what we can actually do is press Alt-H to unhide everything here. And you're going to see we have a nice clean unwrap. Now I always tell people when you're just trying to get the unwrap in the seams placed, don't worry about the size of your checkers, just make sure they're projected nicely. One thing I did notice here is that these are a little bit slightly rotated. I don't think it's a big deal though. What I could technically do is maybe put a seam here and here, because we're not going to see the top, and that should help split up the islands a bit nicer and project them a bit nicer as well. And then maybe I could put another one here. Let me remove this one and put it here instead. A little bit better. Cool. Now what I do tell people, like I just said, don't worry about the size of the checkers, just wait till you're done unwrapping. Now we can worry about the size. So notice right here, these checkers are smaller, which pretty much means that this is going to have a much higher resolution, while these back here are bigger, which means it's going to have a much lower resolution. So you don't want to have a really sharp texture here and a blurrier one here. It doesn't make sense. So once you're done unwrapping, what we have to do is unwrap everything together. So I just select everything in edit mode. I press U, unwrap, and since the seams are already marked on all these different pieces, you're going to see it unwraps very nicely. Now, before we do anything, what I really recommend doing is going to this UV panel and ticking on the average island scale to make sure that the checkers are truly the same size, and then you can go here to pack islands. Now Blender has an okay packer, but a much better packing add-on is UV Pack Master. It's going to be the best add-on you purchase, so I'd really recommend picking it up. I have links to it in the description, and you're going to see why. So let me show you. The first thing I do with this add-on is I go to Advanced Options and turn on Normalize Islands, which is basically the same thing as Average Island Scale. So we turn that on. I turn Heuristic to 10 seconds so I don't have to wait super long. And then all we have to do is click on Pack, and notice how much better the solution is. Now the ultimate goal here is to get as much gray space removed as possible, and this is a reasonable, decent solution. I wouldn't yell at you for this, but there are some additional gray areas we could sort out. Now let me show you some additional ways to really optimize this unwrap even more. The first thing you can do is remove faces that cannot be seen. So for example, if you just go into solid mode, you can pretty much see that in the back here, I'm not going to ever see any of these faces, so why do I even have them? I can just go ahead and remove them. So I can remove the one in the back. I could technically drop in a loop cut and remove some more of these, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. So I can remove that one back there, and then same for this one. I could delete this face, right? What else could I do? So you could remove the faces in the back of the door here, but you might see them if the door were to open, so maybe not. The top and the bottom, if we're not going to see the top and the bottom, maybe there's like a wall covering it, you could technically remove, these faces here. Just be careful because you don't want to show that to the viewer. So maybe I'll just remove the faces on the bottom because I don't think we're going to ever see any of those. Just remove it completely because it's probably going to be sitting on the floor, right? There's really not too many faces in here we can remove in this particular example, but we can at least remove some. So we could do that, and then the faces here in the back, we can remove those. That looks good. Now we could also remove some of the faces on this one as well. Now be careful because you might think you can just go in here and delete out all these faces on this part, and you would be wrong because if we deleted these faces, look what happens to the bevel. Notice that right here we have a bevel, and when I remove those faces it goes away. So now you're going to see we don't actually have a bevel right there. So what I recommend doing in these cases is simply insetting the faces here, because what's going to happen is as long as we inset it and set it here, when we delete this, we're still going to have that bevel being retained, right? So that's one way I do that. You can do the same thing on the inside of the door here. Select this whole portion, inset that, and then delete, and we're still going to have all of that. So same idea for the inside of this area. So we can just press L and L, inset all of that stuff. And it's going to be a bit tricky. We don't have too much room to inset, so just don't go too far. Delete those faces. And that should be fine. Then same for this little slice piece right here. We're not going to see most of the inside of this slice piece, so let me actually clean this up real quick. I forgot to do that. So let me merge this one here, merge this one here, and then maybe merge these together. Shading might break a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal in this case. Okay, then we'll just go ahead and inset this portion. Very good, and then the back side as well, we could do the same thing. So inset those. Got to be careful here. Let me just dissolve that one out. And then inset, delete. Perfect. And you're going to see we don't see any difference. So pretty powerful workflow. Let's go to this one now, down here. Just give that one a quick inset. Good. And then same for this piece. We can at least inset this area, I think. Actually, no. Let's leave that one alone. But what we will do is grab the back side, delete that out, and then maybe for this one, just do a quick inset. And pretty much this whole back piece over here, we can't even see. So what I'm going to do is actually just cut that out. And I'm not sure what's happening. Let me go into View Align. Okay, something weird's happening there. But anyways, regardless, what we can do is just, at the very least, remove these areas, like that. And then we can just, resharpen that. Should be fine. And I also forgot to delete the back face out of this one. We don't need it. Just remove it. Pretty much the same thing for this. We can just delete out those pieces, sharpen it again, and you're going to see absolutely no difference visually. So there's always going to be faces or areas you forget to remove, and that's just part of the process. Just try to remove as much as you can, and if you forget a few here or there, not a massive issue. It's going to happen, but try to get as many faces deleted as you can. And you're going to see maybe one more right here could be good. Let me actually apply this bevel. We'll just go in here and set that. And you're going to see, yep, looks good. As long as the window moves with it, right? There we go. Now the final thing we need to do in this process is make sure all of our bevels are set to one segment. Reason being is because if they're not set to one segment, what's actually going to happen is you're going to get these baking artifacts whenever you try to bake the maps. There's a whole technical reason for this. I don't want to get into detail in this video because it's quite boring and not very exciting, but if you want to research a bit more about baking with bevels, you can probably find some solutions on there. But just take my word for it, change your bevel segments to 1. It doesn't really look much different. You can kind of see between 3 and 1, it's basically the same thing. In addition to that, it also reduces the overall poly count, which is even better. So it's kind of a win-win. So just turn all these to 1. You could even do this beforehand. You don't really need to use 3 segments. I just think it's the default for hard ops. And then hide all of that. And now we should be good to go. So you're going to see we have about 9,000 tries on this piece, but keep in mind that's with bevels. If we removed all the bevels, I bet this would be around 3,000 to 4,000 tries, which is not bad. So we're going to go ahead and unwrap this again. So we should have a much better solution with a lot less faces and space being used. And what we could also do is use this add-on called UV Squares to actually straighten out some of these more rectangular islands that are made of quads. We can actually straighten those out, and we could even find some more rings that we may have missed. and just kind of figure out which areas those correspond to. So here in the back, for example, I'm not sure which area that is. Can I delete that out? No, I can't. It's holding the bevel. I'm just going to leave that alone. But what I can do is just take any of these pieces that we can straighten out somewhat and just do that real quick. So this one's not going to really work. This one should work. Same for this one. Same for these pieces. The analogy I give to people is, imagine you have a suitcase and you're trying to pack in a PVC pipe. Would you rather have a bent PVC pipe or a perfectly straight one, kind of cut into pieces? That's going to give you a much easier packing solution in that suitcase, right? So that's kind of the analogy I like to give to people. And this is probably fine. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. Actually, what happened here? Okay, something happened. Let me just select these again. That was a bit weird. I don't think there were that many, so it was literally just these pieces and then just a few of these. Okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and go into the UV Squares add-on and click on 2 Grid by Shape. You might have to turn this off. And by the way, this add-on is completely free. You can just get it on GitHub, I believe, so pick that up. But there wasn't too much to straighten out here. And anyways, what we can do now is just go back to UV Packmaster and just get a much better packing solution here. And there's still quite a bit of gray space, so I think what I'm going to do is just a final optimization solution here is just to take any of these rings we have going on and split them into smaller pieces. So for example, what I could do here is maybe take this piece, and just for these seams here in the back we're never going to see, what I could do is maybe just put a seam there, put a seam there, and you can just split these into even smaller islands, which is pretty cool. So let me grab this piece. And was that the right one? Yes, it was. I'm just going to keep looking for any areas that are more of a ring formation. So like right here. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so this one should be able to be straightened out even though it looks like a ring. Sometimes these just kind of trick you. So I think we just actually need to go back in here and do that again. So we're just going to take this piece, pretty much all these pieces, whatever these things are. Now be careful, because if you have n-gons, they will not straighten out properly and the add-on won't work. So just select the ones that have quads, these right here. This one does not. So I could technically retopologize that and just connect those vertices together. And let me show you how you would do that. So for example, I could take this face and this face, Control T, Alt J, and just hopefully get a decent solution there. Let me actually symmetrize this. So I'll reset the origin and then just symmetrize over, which isn't actually perfectly symmetrical, unfortunately. Okay, so all I'm missing here is this needs to be connected to that point. And maybe I could just dissolve this random portion out here. Here, and then remove these. Don't need that. And then same for the back. We could just Control T, Alt J, and then just dissolve this out. And now we can straighten those. It's very easy to go overboard on this optimization, but it is also very crucial because you want to get this pack as clean as possible, but you also have to consider how much time it's going to take you and if it's worth that time. Usually it is, but just be careful, you know, because it will take you quite a bit of time. So what else? We'll get these. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, it looks good enough to me. So let's go ahead and 2 Grid by Shape. Sometimes you'll actually get like these weird issues where it just doesn't straighten out, and sometimes you just have to undo it and redo it, and that could also indicate you actually don't have quads, you have an n-gon. And you can see right here we actually have an extra vertex, so Shift L, we can deselect that one because it has an n-gon. This one might be the same issue. Yep, so Shift L on that one. but pretty much everything else here is going to be good to go. So now what we can do is pack it again. Much better. Alright, so I'm happy with this solution. I don't need to go any further with it. This is pretty much decent enough. A little bit of extra gray space, but we're not going to get much of a better resolution, even if we could cover that. So here it is, a very clean unwrap of this door. I could have also removed these faces in the back here. I forgot about those, but you know, like I said, you won't remember everything. Now let's stop here for a sec and just answer some common questions I get. The first one is, do we have to unwrap the high poly? The answer is no. The reason we unwrap is because this gives Substance Painter areas to, map the textures to. We're not going to be using the high poly in Substance Painter. We're only using the high poly for baking, so we only need to unwrap the low poly version. The other question I get is, do we have to do any sort of optimization on the high poly? Not usually, unless you have overlapped geometry, which can cause issues, but in this case we actually don't. And one way to check is to simply go into the face orientation menu. Yours might show up as blue, but just look for any red areas. If you don't see any red areas, that means you don't have any overlapped geometry, so you're good to go there. So the high poly, you don't really have to do anything to, okay? The only thing we'll be doing to the high poly later is triangulating it. So right now the low poly is the only thing we have to do some work on. And most of the hard work is in the unwrapping. And the next step, the final step of the MAD-T workflow that I use, is triangulation. So we've done the modeling, we've done the automation for unwrapping, we've done any sort of decimation for optimizing, and the final step is triangulation. The reason you want to triangulate is because this is an n-gon-based mesh. Now, one of the big reasons people preach in all quad-based workflows for a few reasons. If you're doing like a VFX pipeline or doing any sort of deforming or animation, sometimes all quads could be very important. For example, if this was an asset that was meant to explode into 1,000,000 pieces, this n-gon-based mesh would not work at all. So that's one practical use case of all quads. Another one is it's easier to run trim sheets and straighten out your UV islands and things like that, but for the most part, that's not really a main reason that I worry about. Another reason I hear to use all quad is because that's just the way it's done, which is a pretty lame excuse if you ask me. If there's a specific reason you need to use quads, fair enough. But just for that reason with no explanation, not fair game, right? And another good reason to use quads would be because quads are what I call natural triangulators. For example, if I had this cube, or even better yet, a sphere, let's go in here and add in just a UV sphere. Notice how this is pretty much all quads, and if I subdivide this or triangulate it, look what it does. It's a natural triangulator. They triangulate with pretty much no stress. See this? Pretty much ready to go. So if you were to export an all quad based mesh into another software, whatever triangulation algorithms those softwares are using is going to be able to handle those quads without issue. A lot of the reason people say n-gons don't work is because it's true. If you just export this mesh as is, you're going to get a mess. Because what happens is all these different 3D softwares, they have different triangulation algorithms. And what happens is when you export this to say Marmoset or Substance, and it tries to automatically triangulate the mesh for you, it usually ends in a disaster. So we always want to triangulate beforehand in Blender. As long as we do that, we're going to have a mesh that works inside of these softwares, okay? So this is an easy way to do it. Triangulating is very easy in Blender. What we need to do is just select the mesh, any of these pieces, and add a triangulate modifier. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to save a backup copy. So we're going to make a triangulation here. Tick on the Keep Normals button, and then what we're going to do is make sure we have the Copy Attributes add-on turned on. So now what we can do is select everything, Control-C, copy selected modifiers, triangulate, and click OK. And you're going to see this entire mesh is triangulated. Now, could we technically stop here? Yes, we could, but some of these triangulations are really stretched and just overall quite nasty, and they could cause some problems. So for example, look here in the back. Notice how much these are pulling down. What I like to do in these cases is to just reroute the triangulations a bit. So for example, I'm just going to run a knife cut from here over to here, and I can dissolve out these really far connection points there. And then we can just go back into wireframe, see how that looks. So these are pulling a little bit too far. So what you could always do in these cases, you could simply, you could simply subdivide this edge, Control Shift B to bevel that vertex. And now we're going to have a much better connection point on those. We could do the same thing on the other side here. We could subdivide this edge and just snap it to this one, and then snap this one down here. And you're going to see these triangulations are a lot better. We could even move that up a bit. So these are a lot more perpendicular. That's the main goal here, is to make these triangulations more or less orthogonal. Then same for up here. We could do the same thing. Just subdivide, maybe move that around a little bit. That's going to be a lot better for the mesh. Now for right here, these are all pulling pretty far. So what I like to do in these cases is make a centralized vertex, which will actually make this connection point a lot more elegant and perpendicular. See that? So that's just one way I like to kind of clean up these nasty stretches, just because it's very easy to do. So maybe for this vertex here, move that up a bit. Could probably move these down a bit as well. That's fine. You're going to see this is already much better. This bottom portion looks fine. Now over here, what we could even do is we could maybe join these together. Just kind of move that down a bit, and that's just going to naturally catch. This kind of depends where you want it, right? We could do the same thing here. We can't move that one, but we can join that and just kind of move that up. These should all be okay, so not going to do too much work in there. So that's just a little bit better of a triangulation strategy. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that piece. And same idea for these. We could just make some more centralized connection points. So maybe just run a knife cut from here to here and just help these triangulations a bit. Could even run from here to here. Move this over a bit. Move this up a bit, right? And if I really wanted to, I could even, do something like that. Check the back. Back, same problems. We're just going to go ahead and maybe run a knife cut from here to here. And then here to here. And maybe this one over a bit. Now these corners are what I call a ping-ponging effect. They kind of go back and forth like this. So to fix that, you can usually connect both corners like that, and then just kind of move these vertices in a better location so they catch better. Got to be careful you don't overlap anything though. So maybe take this one, move that over a bit. And then maybe move this up a bit, much better. Go ahead and hide this. And then same idea for this square. Whenever you have squares like this, you're almost always going to have this ping-ponging effect. So just join it up like that, and then like that. Then you can just do a quick symmetry to both sides. That's going to be a much better separation. Same for the back. Join. You can press Shift R to repeat the command, by the way. And then just do a quick mirror down, symmetry rather. I use Mesh Machine for that. This one looks okay. Pretty much all quads, so like I said, quads are natural triangulators, so we're good there. This one has a bit of a ping-ponging effect, so I could always, do something like this. And then like this. There we go. And then same for this one, maybe we could do that. And then maybe we could just run a knife cut from here on the X to here. Make that connection point better. And then same for the bottom, here to here. And then connect these up. And that is a much better triangulation. See that? Very clean. Almost done here, guys. You just got to take care of some of these. This isn't too bad. What I might actually do on this one is... Actually, no, I'll leave it alone. This is fine. This isn't too bad. I guess I could, if I wanted to, do something like this, just put a more central connection point for those. That's good. This one's fine. This one's pretty much fine as well. You could even put in a loop cut to split those up a bit more if you wanted to. But these are all pretty much quads, so they're going to be natural triangulators anyways. But for long cylinders, I like to kind of split them up, just to make it a bit easier, a bit cleaner. This one's fine, and this one maybe we could just do something like that, and then maybe connect these up here, and then just join that up or something. There we go. Cool, so we're going to go ahead and unhide everything. So Alt-H, and now we have a much better set of triangulations going on. Go ahead and turn that off, and you're going to see with the bevels we're right around 9400 tries, which is not too bad. Modern graphics cards can handle much higher poly counts nowadays, so not a big deal. Alright, so now that we have our unwrapping done and we have our triangulation done, you're going to see we kind of got a little bit of skewing going on right here. So what I might do real quick, I might have changed the topology by accident. Well, not by accident, on purpose, because I added in those lines. But not a big deal. We can just go ahead and re-unwrap this. So we'll just go ahead and press U, unwrap, make sure we're on conformal. And then, like we did before, we can just quickly, straighten out some of these rings here. Don't spend too much time on this. It's not a massive issue. But just kind of get what you can. So maybe these. Those are all good options, and then maybe the ones that don't have any n-gons, like that. Maybe this one, and what else am I missing? Maybe this one here as well. And now what we'll do is just go ahead and we'll turn this off. Actually, do we have to turn that off? No, we don't. And those are all going to be straightened out very nicely. Looks good. And then we can just go ahead and pack this again. So select everything, pack it again. And we got a pretty clean solution here, and we should be good to go. So unwrapping's done, triangulation's done and all cleaned up. Now we're ready to export this thing. Now, whenever we're exporting, softwares like Marmoset are always going to read based off of the suffix of the mesh. So, for example, the high poly is going to be read as _high, and the low poly is going to be read as _low, meaning we have to rename all of these objects here, but it's a lot easier than you think. So before we do anything, what I want to do is select the entire mesh and then just rename these cubes, okay? So I'm just going to press Ctrl F2 to batch rename. We're going to go to set name, and we're going to set the name here, set to new, and we'll just call this door. And you're going to see everything now gets renamed to door. And then what we're going to do is press Ctrl F2 again, and this time we're going to add a suffix, and this suffix is going to be _low. So now it's going to be door, whatever number it is, and then _low. And that's all you have to do, guys, really easy. Second, we're going to do the same exact thing to the high poly, but one thing we have not yet done to the high poly is triangulate it. So I'm just going to go ahead and smart apply all these booleans and stuff. So select everything, operations, smart apply. And then what we're going to do is just add a triangulate modifier, tick on keep normals, and then copy that to the rest, just like we did on the low poly. Now if we go into wireframe, this is going to look like a complete mess, and I'm not too worried about the triangulations on the high poly because Blender triangulates in such a way that it does not cause overlaps. So I only need the high poly here for baking purposes. I'm not worried about how clean the triangulation is. This here is solely being used for baking, so I don't care how it looks, I just want it to get the job done when I bake it. So you don't have to do anything else when you triangulate this, you're just going to leave it as is. And then just like we did for the low poly, we're going to rename everything. So Control F2, we're going to set the new name to door, and then Control F2 again, and this suffix this time is going to be _high. Click on OK. And now we're ready to export. So to export is really easy. All we need to do is select everything. We're going to go up here to File, Export, and FBX. And I already actually did some test exports here, so I'm just going to go ahead and tick on the Selected Objects button, and I'm just going to call this door _high. And we'll just export that. And then for the low poly here, we're going to go ahead and make sure everything's deselected. And then for the low poly, same idea. We're going to export this one as door_low. Very important that you have that underscore low there. And just make sure selected objects is turned on. And now we're done. So go ahead and save your scene. Grab another cup of coffee if you need one, because Blender is finally can be closed down. We're going to hop into Marmoset, bake everything. Marmoset's like a 2-minute process, really easy. And then we're ready for the fun part, which is texturing. Now, the reason I use Marmoset is because it tends to make the normal maps significantly better than other software, just like Blender or even Substance. But I'm also going to show you how to bake in Substance, so even if you don't have Marmoset, I got you covered. I just want to show you for those of you who are interested. Really easy. It's like 2 minutes. So go here to this baking icon. We're going to load in our high and low poly. So just open those. And you're going to be able to see your low poly, you can turn that off and on, and your high poly, you can turn that off and on. Cool. Now I want to change the samples to 16, the format to 16, and I'm just going to bake the normals here, and I'll also set the resolution to 4K. That one's up to you though. And now all we have to do is click on this P icon for preview. We have to make a new folder, and then we'll just go ahead and change this to PNG, and then just click save. And then you're just going to give it a second and it should bake the normal maps for you. And to change the lighting, you can just hold shift and right mouse button. We'll just kind of move the lighting around and you're going to see now we have these details baked in. See the difference there? Looks really nice. Now I do see some issues here on this portion. Now let me show you a really easy way to fix these types of situations. Notice these nasty bake artifacts here. Check this out. This is kind of like a cheating way to do it, but it gets the job done. What we're going to do, since there's not actually any detail on this pipe to be baked, what we're going to do is simply delete it out temporarily. So what I'm going to do is we can just close out a Marmoset. Okay, with Marmoset closed out, we're just going to go to our low poly. We're going to delete out this one and delete out this one. And then we're just going to export it again. You can just press Q and use the HardOps exporter. It's a bit quicker. This is going to be the low poly. Then same exact thing for the high poly. We're going to go ahead and delete that out, and then we're going to export this one again. So basically this is going to bake without even having those cylinders or anything on the mesh. So we're going to go ahead and export that one. And now what we can do is just undo this. Since we've already exported it, we can just bring these back with Control Z. Awesome. So now we have the FBX files baked, or exported rather, without these pieces. So now when we bring it into Marmoset, it's not going to even consider those. So let me open it. I'm going to go ahead and do the same exact thing as before. I'm going to load those in. Okay. I'm going to change this to 4K. I'm just going to do 16, 16, and we're going to bake the normals. So now all we have to do is click on the P button here. And let me just delete out these folders. I don't need them. I'll just delete that and make a new folder. And then all we're going to do is go to PNG and just wait for that to bake. And you're going to see we won't actually have any issues. Cool. So now we have the areas baked that we actually wanted to have baked. So once this is shown up, it automatically saves to that folder you made. So you can basically just close out of Marmoset now. And now that we have the maps baked without those pieces giving us issues, what we can actually do is export these all once again with these pieces back in place, okay? So we're just going to go to FBX. This will be the low. And then we'll do the same thing for the high. There we go. So now we're ready to hop into Substance Painter and texture this thing. So inside of Substance, all you have to do is go to File, New, and we're going to load in our low poly. We're not going to be using the high poly anymore unless you wanted to bake something specifically, and I'll show you how. So we're going to load in the low poly. We're going to import these, or just the normal map here, and then we're going to click on the OK button. So now if we just go ahead and kind of pan around here, we can go to texture set settings and actually load in our normal map. You're going to see, there it is, very clean. Everything is nice and, set up for us. Now, what we also need to bake is the ambient occlusion and the curvature, and I'll also show you how to deal with the ID maps and what those are used for. So I'm just going to go to Bake Mesh Maps, and if you wanted to bake your normal map inside of Substance instead, basically what you would do is you would go to the high definition meshes right here, and load in that high poly, and then you can just bake the normal map. But we've already baked that inside of Marmoset, so I'm going to turn this off. Not too worried about the world space normal. ID, we haven't set that up yet, going to turn that off. But I do want to bake the ambient occlusion, curvature, and position. The position just defines where the bottom and the top is, and then I'll just turn off thickness. I don't need that. So change this to 4K. Click on Bake Selected Textures, and then give it a second. And just like that, this looks nice and clean inside of Substance Painter. Now let me show you the value of ID maps. So say for example, I just wanted to drop a texture into here, so maybe something like this, and I only wanted to affect certain areas. Well, the way you would usually do that is by simply going to the black mask option, and then you could just go here, and you could use like a volume fill, for example. And you're going to see you might not want to capture this area here, for example. So alternatively, what we'd probably have to do is like paint it in. So instead what we can do is we can define which areas we want to have separate textures for by using what we call ID maps. And we can set those up in Blender very easily. Basically what you do is you just tab into face mode and you just tell Blender, hey, I want these areas to have different textures. And we do that by just selecting the areas. So for example, maybe this portion here, I want to have a certain texture, right? And maybe this one back here could have the, I don't know, maybe the same one, maybe not. But for right now, what I can do is go to Vertex Paint, click on this button, and then choose a color, maybe blue. And if I press Shift K, now we have a blue color. So each separate color is going to represent a separate texture, although you can use the same texture on multiple colors, no problem. So I always aim to go for different colors if I'm not sure. Now what I do want to do is save this color on the palette just in case I want to access it again and give another piece the same color. So here if we just go to the workspace panel and go to color palette, I can click on new and then click on this button here so it'll be saved. So now what I usually do is I just tab into edit mode and then hide it, and then I just do the same thing for these other pieces. Maybe we'll give this one a different color. Now make sure you get everything. It's very easy to mess up. I'm going to get this interior part as well. I'm going to go to Vertex Paint and give this maybe like a green color. Shift K, tab into edit mode. Actually, before we do that, let's save that to the color palette as well. And then we can just go ahead and hide that piece. Pretty easy. And actually what I probably should have done is also gotten this area here maybe. So no problem. That's why we have the color still saved in here. Shift K. And then we'll just go ahead and hide this portion. By the way, you can get that back with Alt H very easily. So this part here, I definitely want to have a, actually I can just go into vertex mode and press L on this whole thing. It'll select the entire thing. Maybe I'll give this one like a yellow. Shift K and then add that to the color palette. And then hide it. That one should be hidden too. And the rest of these should be pretty easy. We just have to go to, I'm going to hide all that. We just have to go here, we'll select the door, and we're going to give this one another color, so maybe like an orange. Shift K, and then add this to the color palette. Okay, and then this one right here could be another color as well. And it doesn't matter if you use like different shades of orange or whatever, just make sure they're different colors physically. So this one, add to the palette. You should get the idea by now, but I just want to show the whole process. This will be the window, so this can be maybe like a cyan, just to kind of represent the window so we remember. Well, it should be pretty obvious, but... And then we're going to hide that. And then we have just a few more, so we have this one here. We could give this one maybe a purple. Right, and then we'll go to this one, same idea. Turn this on, Shift K. And then hide that. And then just a few more over here. Now I want all these to basically be the same thing. I don't know if there's a way to do this all at once. I don't remember. I don't think there is. But not really that big of a deal as long as I just have, you know, a new set of colors here. It doesn't matter too much. So we can hide that. Machine Tools makes it easy to hop into Vertex Paint. I think it's, which one is it? This one. So just if you want to do it that way, it's always a bit easier. And then these pieces up here will have the same exact one. So vertex paint, Shift K. Don't forget to add these to the palette just in case you need them again. And the same for this one. Shift K. Hide it. And then we just have two more. We have one right here. These are going to be the same one, I think. So maybe give this like a faint color, whatever you want that to be. Can add that to the palette. And then one more right here. Shift K. And then what we can do is press Alt H. And we're going to have a, if we go up here, we can go to vertex, and you're going to see now we have vertex colors assigned. And I'm just going to make a separate save here. And now what we can do is just export this one more time. So we'll go ahead and go to settings, export FBX, overwrite the low poly, and then just go back into substance. So now we can basically just load this back in like we did before. We'll load in our low poly. Going to import that normal map. Going to click on OK. And then all we have to do is just hop in here, select that normal map, and now what we can do is we can bake the ID, the ambient occlusion, the curvature, and the position. Now for ID, we're not using, just click it, we're not using material color, we're using vertex color. Make sure you change that. And then basically we just set this to 4K, and we're ready to go. So just bake it, give it a second, and you're going to see those vertex colors should pop up once this is done. There you go, you can see them right there. You could even go up here and go to ID. And basically this all represents where different textures are going to go. Very, very useful. So let me change this back to material right there. And now we're ready to texture this thing. Now the way I like to begin is to just find a material or texture that I think would look cool on this asset. Now one thing I see a lot of people do, especially beginners, is they tend to throw like a million different textures onto their model. Much like you want to have good visual design and only use primary, secondary, and oftentimes tertiary details, you can pretty much apply the same concept to texturing. Now rules can be broken, but a good general rule of thumb is you don't really need more than like 3 to 4 textures, and for more primary shapes, maybe like even 1 to 2. So don't go overboard on texture, just focus on a few really good ones that fit the design and then play with them there. Okay, so let's look for maybe, I was playing with this one, this steel. So I use smart materials up front because smart materials have different effects built into them, like scratches, grunge, dirt, edge wear effects, things like that. So I always recommend going for like a smart material up front, kind of see what you have. This one's not too bad. We could try maybe like a steel. That one's not too bad either. Let's try an iron here. Let's go to maybe iron forged. I know this one's pretty good. This one might actually work. So what I want to do, and this is why we used ID maps, I want to right click, add mask with color selection. And what we can do now is we can pick the color. And this is why I really love ID maps, because we can basically just, pick a color here and we can just reuse it if we want. Just pick another color, maybe back here, same color. And that's just the power of ID maps. That's pretty good. We could also try just experimenting with some of these other materials. Maybe we could do one with the steel and just kind of override it, see how it looks. Just visually, I think the other one looks a lot better. So that's one trick I use. I just kind of overwrite it by putting it on the top of the layer. And if I don't like it, I can always just delete it out. So press the delete key. So we could try steel painted, or maybe something like this. A lot of these steels are pretty good. It just kind of depends what you're going for. Let's try this one here. This one's actually pretty cool. So we have this one and we have that one. And a lot of this will come down to like personal style, personal preference, right? You can maybe like mix the two by just kind of turning down the opacity, right? So now you have like primarily, let's see, if you turn this all the way down, you're going to see you're basically just left with this base shape here, or base base material. You can kind of see those streaks there, but if I turn the opacity back up, it'll go away. So just kind of play with that. Maybe like mix and match the two. This isn't too bad. And maybe for these secondary shapes, so these details here, the window or whatever, well obviously the window is going to have a glass, so we can kind of give that one an exception. But maybe for the door, I found that the plastic materials, although they're called plastic, actually look pretty good. So you have like, this one is, if we change this to a white color, it might look pretty good. I don't like the streaks on here though. Let me try going to, in the folder, we can go to the base color, change this over to white. And I definitely want to get rid of these, this dust effect looks awful. And then we have some stains here, which isn't too bad. What I am going to do though is just slightly decrease that. We don't need that many stains. So just go pretty low. You could also play with the actual size of the stains. So you just go in here and, sorry, not in there. We go to grunge stains right here, and there should be a scale option. You just kind of play with the scale there, and you can kind of make that a little bit more like plaster, like someone threw some water on it or something, but that could work. You could also turn this one off and just leave like one set of stains instead. Something a little bit more like that. I think that'll look pretty cool. And now what we can do is we can actually drag this below all the way to the bottom here. And that's just going to automatically, since this comes first and then these overwrite it, but are not selected on the door, then that should just pop in very nicely. Not sure I like the aesthetic here. What I might try is a different plastic. Let's see. One of my favorite plastics here is the, where is it? This plastic used. I always just drop this one in and then I immediately change it to a different color. So instead of tan, we could do like a white color here. I think white's going to be the only one that really fits in this case. So something not too bright, not too dark, just kind of like sci-fi-ish, right? And I'm probably going to disable the, so you can see we have some pretty heavy bumps there. You could drop the opacity or just disable it altogether. And then you have like roughness variations, some spectacles. Most of these I'm actually fine with. You have some soft dirt. You can kind of go into the mask editor here if you wanted to and just play with that dirt level so it's not too heavy. You also have the edge wear, which is pretty subtle, so I'll leave that alone. We're just going to drag this to the bottom, and I think this one looks a lot nicer. Now I do think we could maybe play with these settings a little bit more. So this is the soft dirt. This one's fine. I actually like that. These are the edges, roughness variations. Now what I could do is go to the base color here, and this we can change the parameters like metallic and stuff. You could make the door metallic if you wanted to, so it has that nice feel to it. Now keep in mind metallic value should technically be between or just 0 or 1. There's no values in between. You have dielectric and you have metallic materials, so but you can kind of like go in between for artistic purposes. I think that's fine. Roughness you can play with if you want to make it like reflective or whatever, the base color, but not too much of a difference. We're not going to really play with anything else here. That's fine. And then maybe we just drop that a little bit more. Now we're going to add some dirt and different wear and tear and things like that to this model, but for right now I just kind of want to get the base material set up. That's why I tell you guys, when you're modeling, just design simple shapes and see how you can build on those shapes. Same with texturing. Put very simple textures and then see how you can build on those. Also, I think I'm going to go over to the, let me close this folder, to this Iron Forge and just go to the color selection. Actually, not this one. Let's do it on the Steel Dark and see how this looks. It's actually not too bad. If I wanted to mix and match, I could also drop this other one here too. But I kind of like that aesthetic right there. Now, one thing I learned in a book that I read quite some time ago, the book was called The Design of Everyday Things. It's a pretty cool book. Kind of teaches you how to think a bit more, just like common sense thinking about how you design things. And this can be applied to 3D. And one thing or one concept in that book was the idea of signifiers. So say you're going up to like a fire escape, right? The door should be very, very obvious how you use the door. It should be obvious if you're pushing it. It should be obvious if you're pulling it. You shouldn't have any trouble getting out of a fire escape, right? And the book was talking about situations in which there were doors designed that people were just rushing to get out, but they couldn't figure out like which way you open the door. And that's dangerous, right? Now, in this case, we don't really have any danger, but it's a pretty good concept to consider. You want to immediately tell the viewer where they should be, opening the door, where all the attention should go. And one very easy way to do that is to use a completely different color that pulls a lot of attention. So, The door handle's pretty obvious here, and we're all kind of acquainted to that, but it kind of blends in a way. But watch what happens if I maybe do like you can play with some more materials here, or you can just build your own if you wanted to. But for example, I could use let's do something like this. What I could do is add a mask with color selection and then put this on the door handle, and this immediately is going to pull attention, right? So the first thing anyone's going to see when they look at this thing is this door handle because it pops so much. Now I don't like this color. I would recommend kind of playing with that, right? So what we could do is go in here and let me just maybe turn some of this off and just kind of see what we have going on here. That's why I like these smart materials, because they're pretty much just plug and play, although you can always build your own as well. I want this to be a little bit darker, maybe even like on the orange side or something if I wanted to, but I think the red's going to be our best bet. I'm going to go for a more like subtle type of red here, so just something like just a hint of red, right? So it still kind of blends in with that color, but you can still clearly see it. I don't want it to be like too attention pulling. So this is a pretty easy way to just tell the viewer immediately, hey, this is how this thing works. Now the last thing I think we're missing here is some glass. So there's some pretty cool glasses in here. Glasses. Is that like the right term for plural? I don't think so. We have some pretty cool glass. Just drop that in and add mask with color selection. And then just pick there. And now we're going to have a pretty cool looking window here. Now this window looks a bit too plain, a bit too generic. So what I'm going to actually do is find some sort of material that I could use as like a dirt almost. So I'm going to look for maybe, I've always found that the steel or some of just the basic materials work pretty well. You can just pop in and find like a simple steel rust or just something steel rough. What you could actually do here is kind of get some wear and tear looking. Now you wouldn't technically have wear and tear from rust on glass, but it's how it looks. That's mainly what I'm going for. But you know, if that kind of bothered you and you wanted some more natural stains, you could always just add in a fill layer here and just try to find like a darker type of grimy color. And then all you'd really have to do is add a generator. Or actually, we'll add a black mask first and then add a generator, because what the black mask does is it conceals this entire material. But when we paint in white, let me show you. If I were to go to add paint and I were to paint in white, it'll actually begin to reveal that. That's how masks work if you're not familiar with that. So what generator will do is it will add white in a way that looks like dirt. It's pretty cool. So if I go here and go to dirt, notice it adds white and it kind of adds in a way that looks like dirt. So now what I could do is I could limit it to this glass here only. But it actually kind of looks cool. I just, out of curiosity, want to just see how that looks layered. It's kind of cool. But anyways, I just want to put this on the glass. So all I need to do here is I need to right click and add a color selection, choose the window, and you're going to see it doesn't work. Even if we switch the spots here in the mask stack, you're going to see it still doesn't work because the entire door either has the dirt, or if it's switched, then the window just doesn't have anything. Now the reason this is happening is because of our current blend mode. Let me drag this down here. So what I want to happen first is I want to have the dirt first. So the dirt's going to appear, and then below it we're going to have the color selection. Now if I change this to multiply, you're going to see this actually fixes it. What this does is it multiplies the top layer over the bottom layer and gives us the darker result. So you can imagine this dirt is going to have just splotches of white, and this color selection is going to have full white. So we're going to basically receive the darker result here, which ends up being the dirt. I think probably explained that in a confusing way. But worst case scenario, you can always play with the blend modes by just clicking and just control scrolling through. And generally you'll find the solution that you need if blend modes confuse you. They definitely used to confuse me, and there's still certain ones that I just I don't even use because they're not very intuitive to me. But that's basically how multiply works. You also use multiply in situations like in Blender for ambient occlusion when you want to just reveal the shadows only. So that's another useful way to use multiply. But in this case, it actually works quite well, as you can see. So now we have like a dirty window, maybe a bit too heavy. So what we could do is we could kind of play with the dirt level. So you just give a little bit of dirt. You could also play with the dirt contrast. You can play with some of the grunge amount settings if you really wanted to get dirty, but it's kind of up to you. You also have grunge scale, so you can play with that. some decent ones, and then you have, you know, some various other settings here. So I'm just going to leave this alone. You could also use Seed to kind of randomly generate some additional effects, but yeah, just play with it, see what you like. You're going to find something. So now what I could do is start just working on some additional little details. So maybe I could add in a paint bucket tool here, and what we could do is, let's see, add a black mask, and then maybe we could make this one like a much darker color. And then I could just start painting in like whatever I want. Or what I could use here, I could go to the black mask and choose a different alpha and just kind of find some cool looking shapes. So for example, if I chose this one, then guess what? If I control right mouse button to scroll up, we kind of get that effect. So maybe this is like a, this could be pretty cool. Maybe this is like the entrance to some medical facility on some sort of spaceship. So what we could do is put that there, and then, you know, just find like a green color. But these kind of clash a little bit too much for my liking. The red and the green, I actually just prefer that neutral color. Also, that positioning is awful, so you might want to hold Alt Shift and left mouse button to kind of swing to the front, and you could just try to find like a spot that looks good. So that's actually pretty well balanced. Up here, I don't think is going to work very well. We could try though. Let's just kind of imagine how that looks. Yeah, it's a bit too much. I think this is a good triangle of focus to have. Because what's going to happen is the eye is going to immediately bounce to the door handle here, and then most of these details up here, which are the most visible and interesting, and then down here this is going to pull quite a bit. So it's going to be like a triangle of interest, and that's kind of the idea I'm going for with this design. Now let's go to base color. You can kind of play with the color. It doesn't have to be super sharp, but it certainly doesn't have to be super light, so we don't need it to pull too much attention, just enough to hold the viewer in that triangle. This is pretty good, I'd say. I'm also going to add in a color selection. I'm curious how it would look around that windowsill if I just drop that black color there. Perhaps it's a bit too heavy. Yeah, that's kind of why I was worried. I thought this would be a little bit too tight, and maybe it is, but that could work, but I think I prefer this one. Now what I want to do real quick is I want to load in a different HDRI. Now the one I use is called Abandoned Slipway from Blender. Now to load in your own custom ones, I believe what you have to do is go to Import Resources and then add the resource here. So I could just add the my usual Abandoned Slipway, and then I would make this a an environment, and I just need to import it for this current set or project only. So import that. Then what we could do is kind of play with the HDRI settings, so maybe see how Abandoned Slipway works for lighting. Just give it a second to load. And then just hold Shift, right mouse button. You can just see how drastically the lighting switches in here, and it just kind of makes a cool different aesthetic. I kind of like this. Maybe I could also try, and by the way, all these HDRIs are free on hdrihaven.com. This is where I get all of mine. You could also try maybe this abandoned parking. Do that as an environment, and then maybe this abandoned tank farm. I found these are pretty cool, and this could be for the project. And just play with HDRIs. It's hard to say that quickly. Just play with these and see what you like. So this one's the abandoned parking. Let's see how that looks. It's not too bad. I don't like it as much though. And then we have the abandoned tank farm. This one might be too dark. Actually, it's not too bad. I think I'm just going to go with the Slipway because this one is just very neutral, overcast lighting, although a bit boring in some cases, but I think it looks interesting here. Now one thing you can do is you can go here to the settings as well and turn on shadows. I found that shadows can kind of help highlight the form a bit more, but it's pretty heavy by default. You can always turn this down and just give it a little bit of shadows in there. You have average and you also have intensive. I don't know if it makes a difference, to be honest. You also have like field of view and focal length. Right now the focal length is at 17, so you could change it if you wanted to. I found this looks a bit weird to me. I'm just going to keep it at 17. I think Blender's default one is 50 though, and then if you were going for like a more orthographic render, you could do like 135. But we're going to render it in Blender, so just going to keep this here because it's easier to work with. By the way, nothing wrong with Substance Painter for rendering. I just prefer to use Blender Cycles because it looks a bit nicer to me. And also I can use different planes as reflectors. I can diffuse light if I need to. I can put it on a floor and add backdrops and things like that. So just a bit more versatility with Blender, but it's really easy to export all this back into Blender, so don't worry about it. We also have some post effects, and we're not done yet. I just kind of want to show you. You can do some simple color correction if you did want to, you know, do some rendering in here. I do not think this will affect the exports of your textures, just the overall look here in Substance Painter. So I'm just going to keep this at 1. So you could do that. You could also do things like a glare if you had that, vignettes, just stuff like that. And then if we go down, we should have, actually I think that's it really. So there's some pretty cool ones. You also have like color profiles you could just scroll through. I don't really use these, to be honest. That one looks kind of interesting. Looks like we're in a dark hallway. But these could be useful as well if you're running a Substance, but I'm not gonna mess with those. Now, what I think I'm gonna do is go back to this Steel Dark Age, and I'm just gonna, actually it's not that one, is it? It's the Iron Forge. I just think these are pulling too much attention, so let's just give those the same one. That looks a little bit better. Much better. This isn't pulling as much attention. Before it kind of was. Now let me just pump up the brightness in here real quick. I just think it's a little bit too, where's brightness? Color correction, here it is. So yeah, I just want to turn this on and give this a little bit more brightness. I don't want to play with the contrast. I think that's fine. I have no clue what the hell bias is, to be honest with you. Clearly it does something weird. And then you can play with saturation if you wanted to kind of desaturate this a bit more. All stuff we can do in Blender as well. So maybe if you wanted something a bit more neutral, but the issue is that red color will go away if you turn the saturation down. So maybe just do a little bit. Yeah, it looks a little bit better to me. But so far so good, guys. It's looking pretty clean. Now what we could start using is some simple normal stamps. I use this all the time. Let me show you how it works. So if I were to go into, and there's 2 different ways to do this. One really easy way is to go to the brush tool. And what we can do is turn off everything except for normal. And all we would have to do is basically go to this button here, type in normal, and we could use some of these stamps. So this would simply stamp onto our already existing normal map, which means we could basically just not have to use any more polygons. Instead, this would be on the normal map. So for example, we have a handle right here. I could drag this in, and then I could just drop a handle like, I did not mean to do that. We could just drop a handle on the door right here. So, you know, just somewhere decent. There's also this one. Let's see how this one looks. I like this one better. So that's pretty cool. Now this scratch on the door is really bothering me and it doesn't look real at all. So what I'm going to do is just, I don't know which one this is. I'm just going to turn it off. There we go. Scratches. Just disable that. No need for it. And then we can just keep adding more and more of these. Now I see a lot of our students go very heavy on details when they don't need to do that. So these are meant to be enhancement details, not anything that pulls attention unless you want it to pull attention. So these are just meant to be like small little highlights on the mesh just to kind of make it look cool. So you can just kind of find some different stuff in here, like on the top. We're not going to really see the top, so why bother? But, you know, there might be some other areas you want to do like a little notch of some sort. So maybe you want to do like a line. You could even just do something super simple like this. And just, let's just change the rotation in here instead. So 90. Could even just do something like that. Then here and here. Just little details here and there could look kind of cool. So you don't have to go overboard, but I'm just, you know, just showing you what you could do. That's just going to be useless. I don't like these either. I'm just trying to show you like the general idea. Honestly, I don't think I want to put too many, if any at all, because I'm pretty happy with how this looks already. Another thing I could have done is I could have, instead of baking this detail here, I could have probably just used a normal inside of Substance Painter as well. So for example, I could have maybe, let's scroll down and drop one of these in. I could have, like, you know, finessed it kind of with a normal stamp, but just not as good in my opinion. But I'm pretty happy with how this thing looks overall. So if you wanted to add some like additional alphas, you could. So for example, you could drop that in, drop a black mask, and then maybe you could find like some other alphas. You could put like an arrow if you wanted to like emphasize where the door handle was, right? You could do like that. I don't know, it looks kind of weird, not gonna lie, but you get the idea. So I'll leave that up to you. For right now, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. What I might do before we end this, or move to Blender rather, is just play with the, not these. A little bit too dirty, so maybe what I could do is go to the mask here. Let's see how this looks. So we have this one, and we also have this one. Let's go in here and just kind of play with some of these different details. We have the dirt. Maybe we could just drop the mask builder a little bit, so just drop the opacity, or just change the settings overall. You can always do that. Just kind of depends what you're going for. Anyways, now once you're done, what you can do is first of all save your scene because you don't want it to crash, and the second thing we can do is go up here to File and then Export Textures. Now, what we're going to be using is the output template for PBR Metallic Roughness. This is what I use for Blender. Now by default, this one does not have ambient occlusion, so what you can do, and I'll even do it from scratch, let me just find my copy. Use the same thing. I'm just going to remove these. So basically what you do is you go here to the output template, you go to PBR Metallic Roughness, you duplicate it, you can rename it if you want by double clicking, but we don't need the emissive since we don't have any emissive materials. But what we do need to do is add in a gray channel, just copy paste one of these, and then just rename this to like AO so we know what it is. And what we need to do is drop in an ambient occlusion, so like that. And then you're basically done. That's all you have to do. It's really easy. And you're going to see your list of exports. We're going to get all this different stuff. So for example, I guess it didn't update the emissive, but we're going to have base color, height, metallic, normal, and roughness. And we technically don't need the metallic if we don't have any metallic stuff, but it doesn't hurt to export these. You can always delete them if you don't need them. So what we're going to do is just change the, you could leave this on the default, so it'll export as the default resolution we brought it in, so 4K, or you could force it like that. We're going to do there's a bunch of different ones you could do. I think PNG will be fine. 8 bits and dithering tends to work. It just kind of dithers out the noise if you ever have that. Or you could just go for 16 bits. It's going to be a render, so go with what you want. And then we can just export this to a folder. So, you know, I could go here, and then what I could do is go to desktop, and then here, and then substance export, so I know. Select folder, and then export it. It takes like 2 seconds, and then you're done. Now, one thing I just noticed I forgot to do when going through these is I completely forgot to change the option here to PBR Metallic Roughness Copy, the one we copied, because I noticed my AO didn't get exported. So not a big deal. I'm just going to change this and delete out the old maps and then do it again. So then we can export it, and now all our maps should be ready to go. So here it is. We have our ambient occlusion, we have our base color. This height isn't any, we don't have any height information, so we can delete this one. We have metallic, normal, and roughness, so fantastic. Now we're ready to go into Blender and render this. So inside of Blender, just open up your most recent file with the, the door and the UVs material. Go to the shader editor, and what we're going to do is delete out this image texture because we're going to load in our new ones, and make sure you have Node Wrangler turned on. And what we can do is press Ctrl Shift and T to load them in automatically. So I'm just going to go to my Substance Exports folder. I'm going to load in all of these. Now ambient occlusion won't get loaded in for some reason, so what we can do is duplicate this one. So Shift D, press Y because we're in 2D space to move it up. We're going to load in that ambient occlusion manually, and all we have to do to get that in is add in a Mix RGB node set to multiply to ignore the white values because the dark values are what we want to keep for ambient occlusion for shadows. And what we can do, let's go into material mode so we can preview it. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to connect this up, and then put this here. And let's flip these. Cool, and now if you adjust the factor, you can kind of see like it gets darker in some areas. 0.5 is fine, by the way. Just leave that one alone. Cool, and now what I'm going to do is load in my abandoned slipway HDRI. If you want to load this in LookDev and not just Cycles, go here and just go to the install button for HDRIs, and you can load in your own custom ones there. I'm going to be using abandoned slipway because this one looks cool, and I'm also going to load that one in here for the actual world settings for Cycles. So we'll just drop that one in here. We'll go into our rendered mode. And this is a pretty common issue. You're going to notice that it doesn't actually show some of these things. And that's simply due to the ray visibility of some of these different objects here. So if something's not showing up, go to this panel and make sure under visibility, the ray visibility is turned on. I don't know if this is an issue with like some of the hard ops settings or what the deal is, but just keep that in mind. Sometimes these just aren't turned on. I'm pretty sure it's a hard ops issue, but it was only for those few, so not a big deal. And here it is. So now what we can do is really begin to kind of play with this, and this is why I prefer Blender for rendering. Let's add in a plane, and we're just going to move this plane here to the bottom, and we're going to scale this as, you know, big as we want. Something like this. Now keep in mind, the whiter the plane, the more it's going to reflect light. So what we could do is make a new material, and we could kind of dim that down, and notice if we go darker, we get more shadows on the bottom of this, not as much light is reflected. See how dark it is? And then as the light goes up, as the color, it reflects more of that light onto the object. So you can kind of play with this and figure out what value works for you. Right here is okay, and we could also play with like the roughness and just kind of get a little bit of a hint of a reflection there. You can make it fully metallic if you wanted to. I'm not going to do that though. And I'm just going to go for a really simple infinite backdrop. So to do that, basically you could just, usually I just make this super long and then I extrude this up. And what you want to do is make just a really, really high set of bevels here. That's what I do at least. You can smooth it out. And now we're going to kind of have this infinite backdrop. The only issue with this is you're not going to want to have it super reflective. You're going to want to have this more on the roughness side of things. And there you go. And then you have yourself a simple infinite backdrop. You can play with the color. You know, it just kind of depends what you're going for. You can also adjust it in post-processing as well, if that's something you want to do. You could also, you know, increase the strength of the HDRI. Another option is to make the strength really low, and if you wanted to, you could play with like a lighting setup. I know Hard Ops has some random settings for adding lights. You just press Q and then add in lights with nothing selected. And this is okay, but it's just it's random, and when you're doing lighting, you don't want to be random. It can be cool for quick previews, but oftentimes it's not going to give you the best result. This is actually pretty decent, but just be careful when you play with those. See, in this case, it actually isn't too bad. What I am going to do is press Shift A and add in a camera. And what I'm going to do is press Control Alt 0 on the numpad to focus in that camera. Let's turn the render region on so we're only rendering this. And I'm going to do like a 135. Let's go here to, where is it? No, it's under camera. Focal length, we'll do 135. GZZ to kind of move that out. And you kind of have like a really simple setup. I don't think these lights are quite giving me the result I want, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do is just delete that out. And we're just going to use a simple HDRI instead. Just a bit more natural. If you do want to use your own lights, I would highly recommend placing them on your own. So if you wanted to add in like a point light, what you could do is like move this around, play with the power, play with the radius. You can study lighting in Blender on your own. Just different settings make it do different things, but I'm just kind of showing you quickly how you could like kind of play with those effects, make the power really, really high. Could do like, there's 1,000, 5,000's too much. The radius is definitely going to affect it as well, going to affect the shadows. So it just kind of depends what you're going for. So I just tend to go with a really simple HDRI setup. Not only is it easy, it tends to get the job done very well. And I'm not a professional photographer, unlike Ryu, my partner, and he always tends to get better renders than me because that's just his area of expertise. I have, decent renders. They're not top of the line, but they're good enough, and that's mainly what I'm going for here. So something like this. So you can kind of see that light is just picking up a highlight there, a bit too distracting. So you just want to be careful when you're doing that because it can add a bit of emphasis, but it can also pull some attention. So you just be careful when you're adding in your own light because you want to make sure you know what you're doing. But this is actually pretty cool. And what we could also do is kind of see where the lighting's hitting from. So if I go here to the render panel under film and turn off transparent, you can kind of see this is a mostly overcast HDRI, so very good for neutral lighting, but the light isn't coming from here, right? There's a tree, but the lighting is probably coming from somewhere over here, which is kind of why it's highlighted more on the front. And you're going to see if I were to rotate it, I'll just do this very quickly. If I were to rotate this, you can kind of see like 180 degrees would completely change the look. And that is why lighting and just where the lighting's hitting from is so important, because you're just going to have completely different effects depending on where that's from. So play with it, see what you like, but make sure you're just using common sense with the lighting. So we could try like -45 or 45. I think the 0 degrees, the original one, was actually our lucky spot. Cool. Anyways, what I can do now is just reposition the camera a bit. We can maybe just try to find an angle you like. It's a bit too far away from that door in my opinion. But something like this. I'm also going to play with some other HDRIs just in case. While you're here, you might as well just see what other HDRIs look like. So this one actually isn't too bad. We could do like a strength of 1. Kind of like that. I don't think I like it as much as the other one, so maybe I could play with like this abandoned parking. Just kind of see how these work. I have quite a few other ones. There's like this crosswalk. I don't know what these really look like. I don't want to open the preview because it runs a lot of memory, but you don't need to worry about the color toning as much. That can be adjusted in post for your portfolio, but in terms of lighting and just how it's hitting things, you might just want to play with some different ones and just kind of see what different effects you get. Not all HDRIs are created equal. So I'm just going to go through here. There's probably not too many that are going to I'm going to prefer. I always like my neutral lighting, so I'm just going to go back to the slipway here. Keep that set on 0. And now all I want to do is change the power here of this point lamp to like 2000. And maybe just give it like a slight tint of like a different color. Like a slight hint of like a tan or something. Could look kind of cool. Then you could always maybe move it down, move it back. Just see how like these different spots affect it. Actually, I think this is too heavy, maybe like 1500. You could even duplicate it and move something down and just kind of play with that as well. But in this case, I don't think that's a good idea. We're just going to keep it as it is. We'll just do 1000 where it was before. I think that's fine. Finally, this frame is a little bit cramped, so what I want to do is select we'll turn overlays back on, select the camera outline, then press G, ZZ, then hold middle mouse button. I want to give this a little bit more kind of breathing space. Maybe move that down a little bit. The smallest changes can really make a difference, so don't underestimate the power of just kind of, moving things around. Right about there looks pretty good. Maybe just a little bit more, and then I'm just going to kind of pull that down so we have a bit more floor there. This is some of the stuff I struggle with the most, by the way, so if you're struggling with this too, it's totally normal. Lighting and just general composition can be very, very tricky and is something I'm constantly getting better at. So if it's a struggle for you, it's a struggle for most of us. You'll just get better and better the more you do it. Alright, so now I just want to make sure this is set to a higher resolution. I tend to go higher and then downsize if needed, so I'll do 2560 by 1440. And what else do we need to do? I think that's it really. The defaults tend to be fine for me here. I don't use the denoise option or anything. I'm just going to go ahead and press F12 to render it. Now you're going to see when we render it, we have a mess. And the reason this is occurring is because we haven't disabled the high poly in the character and in rendering mode. So let's turn this off. We're going to go to our high poly, turn that off in rendering mode. Same for What's in here? Same for this. We'll turn that off and we'll try it again. I don't think we have to disable the individual ones. We just have to disable the collection. There we go. And here it is, guys. So all we have to do now is go to image and then save as, and we're just going to save this as I usually do TIFF 16-bit for the highest quality, and I'll just call this render. So we'll do that. And another thing I like to do, and you'll see why when we do post-processing, I also like to delete the backdrop. So first of all, save, and then delete the backdrop, and make sure you have transparent turned on under film, like that. So now we're just going to have a simple cutout in case we only want to make adjustments on the actual door. So I'm going to also render this one as a separate cutout. So now we have this, and we can save this as a render underscore cutouts, or just door cutouts. We're going to do 16-bit TIFF again, and now we can hop over into Photoshop, do a bit of post-processing for the portfolio. So I went ahead and loaded in the original TIFF. Now what I'm going to do is load in the cutout here. So what I'm going to do is just shift click, drag this over. You're going to kind of see the shadow difference because the plane wasn't there. So we're not going to actually use this one. This is simply going to be turned off and put on the bottom. So when we control click on it, we'll have it as a cutout to affect this area only. Now the first thing I notice is that the highlights are a little bit strong here. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer, Control J. We're going to go to Camera Raw Filter. We can do some effects in here. Let me make this smaller. And we're just going to go to the brush panel. So right here, we're going to go to brush. And what I want to do is I just want to hold Alt and left mouse button to make this a bit smaller. And what I'm going to do is go over to highlights, kind of reduce these highlights a bit, paint over where those highlights actually are. And you can kind of see we can affect those highlights a little bit. So maybe something like this. And you can kind of see the before and after, kind of reduces it a little bit. Now the next thing I want to do is increase the overall brightness of the scene just a little bit. Just kind of pump it up maybe like, I don't know, you could do like 0.2. And I also want to paint in a little bit of clarity here. So first let me click on OK, and now what I'm going to do is control click on this. So what I can do is only paint in, only be affected on the on this cutout here. So basically I just want to go in and just increase the clarity a little bit. And we're simultaneously going to need to lift the shadows because that messed with the shadows, so maybe around there. Click on OK. You can kind of see it just pops a little bit more of some clarity. Maybe that was a little bit too much. You can always just paint in the clarity in certain areas as well, so you could always just go to the brush panel. You could go over to shadows and then clarity, keep those roughly the same. And then we can just kind of paint in like the areas that are of most importance, like the front. That's where you'd probably put a little bit of clarity, not the whole thing maybe. So do something like that. You can kind of see the before and after. Just kind of pops a little bit more. So far so good. Now I do use a plugin in Photoshop, and I'm just going to show you it here. Let me go over to this extension. The plugin I use is called Infinite Color. Yeah, it's quite pricey, but it works for me. You could also just use color balance instead to just kind of play with some of the highlights and midtones and stuff. But this tool is just pretty useful because you just go to light and you can like play with some quick different color tones. It saves me a lot of time, which is why I use it. So I can just kind of cycle through some different presets here and just see what I like. I want this to have like a more medical feel because of course it's like a medical entrance or something. So I just kind of want to present it as such. So maybe a more like neutral type of feel there. So you can kind of see the difference here. It's a little bit more white, which I like. A little bit more of like a medical feel to it. And then Control Alt Shift E is going to combine everything below that together. So now what I can actually do is maybe I use Nik Collection. I'm just going full plugin here because this is what I use and the main thing I know how to use. But you could alternatively do, I'll show you in a second, but I'm going to be using the film grain tool here in Nik Collection. So let me click on later, make this smaller. What I like to do here is I like to, where's the menu? There it is. I like to use the film grain option in here because it adjusts the contrast and the film grain. So we're going to go here to film grain, and I basically just want to make this, I don't want it to be too heavy on the grain, but maybe like 450. And you can also play with the contrast. So right now it's already at 50%, but I could go even higher, or I could just go back to the default state. This is why I like contrast. This is the original, and this with a bit of contrast. I think 50% will be good. You can also play with the shadows if you want to lift that a little bit, but I think that's fine. And the highlights I want to leave alone, so we're going to click OK. And this should just pop the contrast a little bit more. So you can kind of see, here's the before and the after. This looks a little bit better. Alternatively, what you could have done is you could have used, not infinite color, the camera raw filter, and you could have adjusted the contrast in here. And you could have used the film grain option in here. Very similar effects. I just like this because it's quicker and kind of balances it a bit more. And you could also try using the Pro Contrast tool. I don't want to go too heavy on the contrast, but I do want to see how it looks. Because remember, this is going to be like a portfolio piece. And I'll probably do a little bit more off camera, but I'm just trying to give you the general idea here. So maybe you could do a little bit of, extra contrast to pop it. You also have dynamic contrast. I wouldn't go too heavy on this unless it makes sense. You can like correct the color cast, make it a bit more neutral, which is actually kind of cool. I might go a bit higher on that. I don't know, just leave it alone maybe, and then click OK. And it just pumped the contrast a bit more. This thing is quite dirty, so there's actually another feature in the camera raw filter you could use, and it's called the texture. You could actually kind of reduce the overall texture of this thing. Kind of blurs it a bit more. You don't want to go too heavy on it because then it'll look kind of blurry, but you could always reduce it a little bit. Maybe drop that vibrance a little bit. And the saturation, I don't want to drop too far, but it might actually look kind of good if I just kind of play with these values. Just very subtle effects. You can kind of see the difference there. This makes it a little bit more clean, I think. So already you can see the difference. If I alt click on this layer, here's the before, here's the after. It's just, very subtle effects being stacked. Some people say this is cheating, but I mean, if you're not showing your best self on your portfolio, then it's like, you're not going to get the clients, right? It's like on Instagram when people post all their trips they do and all the cool, all their life. People like to show the best part of their life. You should be showing the best part of your work. And you do this through Photoshop, right? So it's always a good idea to post-process your work. I don't care what anyone says because it's going to make the clients look at your pieces with more respect. And I'm definitely not like the best at Photoshop. I do most of the basic operations. I'm not like a crazy Photoshop guy, but I know like what operations work for me and what kind of make these images pop a bit more. And this is the general workflow, guys. I mean, there's plenty more you could do, especially if you're more well-versed in Photoshop. I just wanted to give you the general idea here. Let me kind of show you could do text. If you go to the text panel, you could put like, the name of the door if you wanted to, drop some text, move it around, maybe change the color, like that. Alternatively, you could put your branding. So for example, I could open our Blender Bros logo and drop that in. It's always a good idea to put your name or your brand just, somewhere in the corner, lower opacity, just so that way people can kind of see who made it. You don't have to go too heavy on it. It's probably a bit too low, but enough to read it. And that's it, guys. That is the entire workflow that I use to make game assets in Blender. We start in Blender. We use my MAD-T framework for hard surface game assets. I'm going to plug the course again if you want to pick that up. It's a really good course. I genuinely think it's going to be fantastic for your learning. So pick it up if you haven't. And I'll link some other resources in the description. So you start with Blender. You do your baking. If you want to bake, then you texture it inside of Substance Painter. Do some rendering in Blender, and then a bit of touch-up work in Photoshop. That is the entire process that I use for my stuff. Now I'm probably going to spend a bit more time on this off camera, but usually when I do this type of stuff, it takes me hours because I'm always going back and forth, and I don't want to bore you with that stuff. So I hope this gave you like the general idea. I didn't really plan to put in the rendering and post stuff, but I thought it would be valuable and hopefully give you an idea of how to do it. I see a lot of people not having the best renders of the best presentation, and this is the general workflow you need. Nothing crazy, just working with lights and working with colors. So I hope this video helped, guys, and if it did, make sure you drop a thumbs up. That really helps out with the YouTube algorithm, helps more people find this video. And like I said, we have a completely free course available on our website if you're new to hard surface modeling called the Hard Surface Jumpstart. You can grab that link in the top of the description. That should teach you a lot about Blender and hard surface modeling if you want to get into it. Other than that, thanks so much for watching. Drop me a thumbs up, subscription, all that cool stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.